Good morning. My name is John Tory, and I'm the chair of the Executive Committee as mayor. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, and I will now call the 28th meeting of the Executive Committee to order and welcome everyone. Today's meeting is being held with members of the Executive Committee participating both in person and by video conference. City staff are also connecting to the meeting by video conference. The public continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. These measures are necessary to comply with public health guidelines and prevent the spread of COVID-19. I ask everyone for their patience with any delays and technical issues. The clerk's staff have connected all registered speakers to the meeting by audio. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Executive Committee's page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. The City Clerk has provided all agenda materials via the Clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff will be available to participants to help with your devices. As part of each agenda item, I will ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to question staff or to speak. I will then create a speakers list and will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or on a motion, I ask that members ensure they turn on their video and raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, I want to remind you that you must submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at exc@toronto.ca to help with motions. If there are any visiting members of council, and I see some who are here attending the meeting today, I encourage you to turn on your video so that I know that you're present and I can give you the opportunity to ask questions or to speak. This will also assist the clerk's staff to record attendance for the meeting. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I would now ask if there are any declarations of interest by any of the members of the committee under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. If you do have an interest, please raise your hand, unmute your mic, and state the nature of that interest and the item. And of course, there's a piece of paper that has to be filed at the same time. Are there any declarations of interest? I see no hands, and I have none myself, so we can move forward. Next, we need a motion to confirm the minutes of the regular meeting of the Executive Committee held on October the 27th, 2021. It's moved by Councillor Pasternak. If there's no comments, I'll call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Before we begin the rundown of the agenda, I would like to add a new item of business. The proposed item is a report from the Integrity Commissioner entitled Updating the Council Member Organized Community Events Policy. I will ask the clerk to display the report on the screen so that members can review it before voting on whether or not to add it to the agenda. So you can see it there, and I believe it's been circulated to the members of the committee, and I would ask that I will move a motion and ask you to concur in adding this item to the agenda as an item of new business. And if we can just go back to the screen, I'll ask if there's any comments on that. Otherwise, I will just ask the question of all those in favor of adding this as an item of new business to the agenda. Favor? Opposed? Carried. So I will hold this item down so the clerk can make the item public online before we consider it in further detail during the meeting. So let's now proceed with the review of the agenda prior to the adding of the item of new business. The first item being EX 28.1, Toronto Hydro Climate Action Plan and Next Steps. We have speakers registered on this item, so I will hold it down. The next item is EX 28.2, Final Tax Design and Steps to Implement a Vacant Home Tax in Toronto. There is a staff report with recommendations. Would anyone like to hold this item down? All right. If not, then I will move, I'm sorry, what do I have here? Oh, yes, I did actually have a motion which we could dispose of fairly quickly. I felt in conversation with Councillor Pasternak in particular that there was some merit to having regular reports coming to the Executive Committee as the implementation is proceeded with on this tax. I had in fact made a little note to myself this morning, and maybe should ask the clerk if she could help me just to say the first such report to be received in Q1 2022. Can we amend this motion to say that? And so I just felt that this was something that came out of some discussions we were having about this matter, and that it would be useful for this committee to receive those reports, and they can in turn go on to council as required. Are there any comments? Anybody wishing to speak to that? Because if not, we can just deal with it as a matter of housekeeping and have the staff report moved and have this item amended as well. First quarter of 2022. I'm sorry, you're right, it was the second quarter. Mixed up with the Metrolinx one. Okay, there is the item with the date put in for the first such report. Are there is there anyone wishing to speak to or ask questions of the mover with respect to this motion? Seeing none, then I'll call the question first on the motion itself. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And now I will move the recommendation contained in the staff report and call the question on that unless there are any comments. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is EX 28.3, 2022 tax-supported interim operating and capital budget estimates. There is a staff report with a recommendation. Would anyone like to hold this item? Okay, it's fairly routine, customary at this time of year. If not, then I would ask if the budget chief, a member of the committee, Councillor Crawford, would move the staff recommendation.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
All right, I'll call the question if there are no comments. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is the EX 28.4 City of Toronto Investment Report for the 6-month period ending June 30th, 2021. There is a staff report with a recommendation. Is there anyone wishing to hold this item? Seeing no one, may I ask for a motion to adopt the recommendations in the staff report?
I'll move it, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Crawford.
Councillor Crawford. Any comments, questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is 28.5, EX 28.5, Property Taxes 2020 Interim Levy Bylaw. There is a staff report with recommendations. Is there anyone wishing to hold this item? All right. If not, then I'll ask again Councillor Crawford if he would move the staff recommendation contained in this report. I will then, if there's no questions, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is EX 28.6, 2022 rate-supported budgets, 2022 water and wastewater consumption rates and service fees. There's a letter from the Budget Committee with recommendations. Is there anyone wishing to hold this item?
I'll hold that, Mr. Mayor.
It'll be held down by Councillor Crawford. Thank you. The next item is EX 28.7, 2022 rate-supported budget, solid waste management services, and recommended 2022 solid waste rates and fees. There is again a letter from the Budget Committee which has considered this together with some recommendations coming from them. Is there anyone wishing to hold this item down?
I'll hold that again, Mr. Mayor. I just want to do some remarks.
All right. It'll be held down by Councillor Crawford in his name. Thank you. The next item is EX 28.8, 2022 rate-supported budgets, Toronto Parking Authority. Again, a letter from the Budget Committee with recommendations. Do you wish to hold that one down as well, Councillor Crawford?
Yeah, I'll hold Councillor Ainsley. Unless Councillor Crawford's holding it.
All right.
Yeah, I'll hold it.
Held by Councillor Crawford then as the Budget Chief. Thank you to you both. Okay, then that moves us along to the next item, EX 28.9, obligatory reserve funds, deferred revenues and reserves, and discretionary reserve funds as at September 30th, 2021. There's a letter from the Budget Committee with recommendations. Does anyone want to hold this item down? If not, then I would ask someone move the recommendations. It's logical it should be Councillor Crawford because it's coming from the Budget Committee with a letter. May I ask you to move then the staff recommendation, Councillor Crawford, and the recommendations?
Absolutely, so moved, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll call the question. If there's no comments, then all those in favor, opposed, carried. The next item is EX 28.10, the capital variance report for the 9 months ended September 30th, 2021. Again, a letter from the Budget Committee with a recommendation. Does anyone wish to hold this item? All right, I will then move to calling the question on this. All those moving the recommendation from the Budget Committee, all those in favor, opposed, carried. Next is item 28.11, the operating variance report for the 9 months ended September 30th, 2021. There's a letter from the Budget Committee with a recommendation. I will hold this item because I'd like to make some comments, if I might. Beg your pardon? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that here. There's a speaker on that item. Yes, I've got that piece of paper in front of me too. Let me just pull that up here so I don't miss that on the way by. Yes, there is one speaker on that item, quite correct. Okay, thank you. Item then EX 28.12. The Metrolinx subways program, real estate protocol and land valuation principles for subways and GO expansion programs. This is a staff report with recommendations, separate and distinct from the one that has to do with the road closures and so on. This is one that has to do with real estate protocol. Is anyone wishing to hold this item down? Okay, then I will ask someone to move the staff report with recommendations. Moved by Councillor McKelvey. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 20, that was 2013, the Parkdale Hub project advancing to phase 3. This is a staff report with recommendations and a letter from the Board of Directors of CaféTO with recommendations. Is there anyone wishing to hold this item down? Significant progress as this continues to move forward, so I'll call the question then. Ask someone to move the staff report with recommendations. Deputy Mayor Thompson. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, and I need a separate motion to approve the recommendations contained in the letter from CaféTO. Deputy Mayor Thompson as well. I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. EX 28.14, Ontario Line Downtown Stations Temporary Road Closures and Community Impacts. There are speakers on that item, so that we'll hold that down. Then we move to EX 28.15, Framework for the Review of Licensing and Zoning Regulations for Restaurants, Bars, and Entertainment Venues. Again, we have speakers registered on this item, so we'll hold that down. Item 28, EX 28.16, the Indigenous Centre for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, a step along the long road of reconciliation. This is a letter from the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee with recommendations. Does anyone wish to hold this item down? All right. Did I see your hand ready to move the recommendations contained in the letter, Councillor Ainsley?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Happily.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is EX 28.17, Accessibility and CaféTO 2022. This is a letter from the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee with a recommendation. Does anyone wish to hold this item down? If not, then I'll move to asking someone to move the recommendation contained in the letter. Is there a mover for that? I see Deputy Mayor Thompson. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And the last item before the item of new business is EX 28.18, Accessibility Impacts on the Closure of Essential Bus Stops in Our Communities. This is a letter, again, from the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee with a recommendation. Does anyone wish to hold this item? Otherwise, I'll ask someone to move the recommendation contained in the letter from the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee, moved by Councillor Pasternak. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And we will continue to hold down the final item, which will be 28.19, which is the report from the Integrity Commissioner, so that people, including the public, have a chance to read it. So that would then bring us back to item 28.1, which is the Toronto Hydro Climate Action Plan and next steps. And we have two speakers registered to speak on that item, and we'll move to hear from them first, followed by questions of staff and speakers. And the first speaker I trust we have on the line is Gabriela Kalapos, from Clean Air Partnership. Is Gabriela Kalapos on the line? Okay, are you there? Good morning.
Yes. Hi
morning.
Chair. I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. I hope my colleagues can hear as well. Can they give me a nod? Can they hear the speaker? Okay, so you have 5 minutes. You're most welcome here, and there may be some questions for you after you've finished your remarks, so please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor, Chair, committee members, and staff. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today about the Toronto Hydro's climate plan. My name is Gabriella Kalapush, and I'm from the Clean Air Partnership, which is a charitable environmental organization that works with municipalities and their partners to advance the implementation and scale-up of clean air and climate change actions. There's no doubt that this Toronto Hydro's climate plan is progress on climate action from Toronto Hydro. However, I do feel the need to point out that Toronto Hydro's climate plan is not yet in alignment with Toronto's climate plan Transform TO. This is both of these councils. While I understand that Transform TO has been discussed by the Infrastructure and Environment Committee, and Toronto Hydro's climate plan is being addressed by the Executive Committee. They are both going in front of council at the same meeting on December 15th, and these misalignments need to be raised. Transform TO is an excellent climate plan. It is clear in its targets, has its pathway identified, outlines the scale of the actions that will be required to achieve the GHG reduction targets. It has performance and reporting framework attached to it. It brings in community engagement, implements a climate and equity lens, and commits to reaching out to underserved residents from past energy programs. And one of the key things also is it commits to advancing a carbon budgeting and climate lens. But as we all know, a plan is only as good as its implementation. And holy smokes, implementation of Transform TO will truly require transformation of a lot of our systems, our transportation system, our building systems, and our energy system. And that is where Transform TO will face enormous challenges. Transform TO is not an incremental plan. It is a transformative plan, and it is a plan that has significant codependencies. The codependencies associated, the Toronto Hydro plan speaks to the assessment that about 75% of the GHG reductions in Transform TO are dependent on Toronto's electricity system being able to support the move from fossil fuels to electricity. But the Toronto Hydro climate plan is not a plan that is in alignment with Transform TO, and I really do think that needs to be highlighted. Toronto Hydro needs to work with the City of Toronto staff to ensure that their climate plan aligns with Transform TO. At present, it is more a goal-based plan than it is, and it is challenging to track progress towards targets as clearly as Transform TO does. There are some KPIs, key performance indicators, that will provide accountability, but it's more of an incremental plan than it is a transformative plan. And with the significant codependencies, that this will pose significant challenges for Transform TO to make the progress it has committed to. It would be misaligned to pass Transform TO and then pass Toronto Hydro's plan as it is, because then what has happened is you've set Transform TO on its implementation way while greatly handicapping it by not ensuring that the other stakeholders that are critical to Transform TO's success are rowing in the same direction and acceleration as Transform TO. This is not the only codependency Transform TO has. There are others, and I would need more than 5 minutes to speak to them. But since both plans will be in front of Toronto Council on December 15th, I thought this was a good opportunity to point that out. I would recommend that the Environment and Infrastructure, I recommend that the Executive Committee require Toronto Hydro to work with the City of Toronto staff to ensure their climate plans identify the scale of actions that will be required to align with Transform TO and incorporate into its plan the codependencies, barriers, and the interventions that will be required. We can no longer hide from these misalignments, and we need to address them head on. There is no doubt that Toronto Hydro will have codependencies with provincial energy planning, just as Toronto has codependencies with provincial energy planning. But shining light on these misalignments will be critical to enabling Transform TO to achieve the transformation that is required to address the scale of the endeavor that is ahead of us. I really thank you very much for allowing me the time to speak to this important item, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Galapos. Are there questions of the deputy? I don't see any hands. I just have a question. Could you talk just a little bit, because I do get your point about, and let me just start the clock on myself here, sorry about that. I get your point about aligning the two plans, and I think some of the review that's going to be called for by the city staff is an attempt to do just that and to sort of go down beneath the sort of top level, if I can call it that, of the hydro report to determine how that can be accomplished. Could I just get your comments on the substance of the report as you see it in the context of some of the different elements that were covered in there? There were 5, going from memory: electric vehicles, LED lighting, the grid itself, a huge investment proposed there. Do you have any comments on the substance of the report aside from I think your well-placed comments with respect to the need for alignment? Do you have any comments on the substance of the report?
I think those are key areas. I mean, certainly from the perspective, I'll give you an example. One of the things that is hampering the advancement of electrification and PV and renewable energy generation within the bounds of the City of Toronto is that there's not enough transparency on understanding where the grid in Toronto can handle the installation of PV panels. And that transparency, not just that information is held within Toronto Hydro. That needs to be shared with City of Toronto staff, and it needs to be shared publicly so residents can understand if they are going to be able to install PV panels on their roof and be able to get access to the grid connection that they need to be able to allow net metering to take place. That wasn't even raised in any part of the climate plan, but it is so critical to being able to advance transform TO. So that's one example of where the misalignment is. Certainly there's examples in terms of, I think from the electric vehicle example, there's just the need for scale up. It is in the climate plan for Toronto Hydro, but nowhere close to the ambition and the acceleration of charging infrastructure that needs to be advanced in order to enable Toronto to achieve the targets associated with EV uptake across its community. Those are 2 examples that I kind of identified. There's others, but I don't want to go on too long because I know that city staff will be able to identify them.
No, that's fine, and I thank you for that. And I'll just ask one more question designed to give you one more opportunity if there is anything else. If we're going to have the city staff and the city manager take a look at the hydro report with a view to analyzing it and also trying to align it, as you suggest, is there anything else besides, you named 2 examples. Is there any broader brush theme that you would like them to sort of particularly focus on because your intervention was thoughtful, and I just want to make sure that if there's something if you were having a chance, as you do right now, to give a message to the city manager and the city staff as they review the hydro report, you've made the alignment point, you've cited a couple of other examples. I'm just giving you one more opportunity if you wish to say there's one more thing that you think is fundamentally important they should look at.
I think one other area that I think is critical is the pathway, because there isn't the Transform TO and the other plans like the net zero building strategy outline the pathway that needs to be achieved and the barriers and issues that's going to be faced and the interventions that will need to be achieved in order to address those barriers. So I think kind of aligning having in Toronto Hydro's plan and in Transform TO those codependencies and alignment in the pathway that the 2 stakeholders will work together on would be enormously helpful, because I think that'll keep the roles that each of the entities like City of Toronto and Toronto Hydro play in advancing this together. They're different entities, but there's a lot of codependencies. I know Toronto owns the Toronto Hydro, but Toronto Hydro is, the functioning of Toronto Hydro is more directed by the provincial government. So those kind of those challenges on authorities and responsibilities are things that have been hampering us, our climate action, for so many years. And I think drawing them out and highlighting them and having Toronto Hydro and city staff report to executive committee at the same time would be something that would be of value. I hope that is helpful in advancing the...
So they had 2 speakers on the climate action plan, and then they have Toronto Hydro's climate action.
Sorry, that's something else that's filtering its way into the broadcast. Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands up to ask questions of you, so I do thank you both for your deputation and for the answers to my questions, and we'll move along to the next speaker. Thanks so much, Ms. Kalapos.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mark Marmer. Is Mark Marmer on the line? Yes. Good morning, Mark Marmer, and welcome to the Executive Committee.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for
So I think you know the rules. It's a 5-minute deputation, or up to 5 minutes you can take, and then there may be some questions for you, so you can please proceed with our welcome.
Good, super. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. My name is Mark Marmer. I'm the owner of Signature Electric. So Signature Electric is a licensed electrical contractor. We work here in the Greater Toronto area, and as such, we have interactions with various local distribution companies in our region. And since we're very close to the city of Toronto, we regularly interact with Toronto Hydro. A great deal of the work that we do is aligned with the Climate Action Plan. That includes a connection of electric vehicle chargers for various types of electric vehicles, the supply and installation of solar panels, and the supply and installation of battery storage. Very often these installations require one or more interactions with Toronto Hydro in order to provide for a smooth, timely, and cost-effective installation for our clients. Toronto Hydro has several very refined and customer-friendly processes to do the basic services, such as service upgrade requests, which can be processed online with ease. Customers and businesses like us find this process very helpful, and we appreciate that running a large organization such as Toronto Hydro is a complex task. That said, there may be a few relatively simple and low-cost adjustments that could be implemented to better support Torontonians in their quest to support climate change and with the help to meet its climate goals. I just want to offer, in the time that I have, 4 suggestions. Following this customer-friendly online request model implemented by the Toronto Hydro, a simple and welcome addition would be a live view of the progress of these requests so the customers can see in an online portal. If this process is mirrored for the solar and energy storage requests, it would greatly accelerate the adoption with a simple and clear communication with 24/7 online access to their Toronto Hydro profile portal. The things I'm mentioning are in case already offered by other LECs. The second idea I had, often when a battery or a solar array is installed, there's a need to isolate the service. Sometimes the isolation is for a very simple item, such as the installation of, on our end, the installation of current transformers on the main lines. It takes only a few minutes to do. It might also be necessary to upgrade a service if a customer does not have the sufficient capacity for a new charger. Often the service is just a matter of removing the meter for a very short period of time and then reinstalling it. Toronto Hydro customers will face a charge of $750 for this service. Some of the other LDCs allow customers one-time free disconnection per year. Perhaps Toronto Hydro could consider the same allowance, making it a little more cost-effective for individuals to do these things. The item 3, often the last step in a 9-step Toronto Hydro grid connection process for the installation of a solar system is the change in the meter from unidirectional to bidirectional, so that the meter can run backwards and forwards and allow for net metering. This allows the customer to take advantage of the net metering, and the net metering allows the extra solar energy to be put back into the grid to offset their annual bill. This, of course, is a very important reason why people proceed with solar installations. It's often very difficult for the customer to determine when the meter is going to be installed. These are simple meter changes, and they can take often a long time to happen after the system becomes alive. And to make matters worse, if the meter hasn't been changed, the extra energy is still pushed back into the grid, but because the meter is unidirectional, the customer, in fact, is actually being billed for the energy that's being put back into the grid. So needless to say, the customers are disappointed they cannot take full advantage of the system, and they spent so much time and energy installing. Seems like a simple matter, again, of communication and setting the proper expectation with the customer, which can go a long way towards customer satisfaction. This can be easily addressed with the previous recommendation to allow for the transparency of the process for the customer's online portal. Lastly, when a customer wants to install electric vehicle supply equipment, so an electric vehicle charger, they must prove to the Electrical Safety Authority that the electrical service can handle the added load. One of the ways this can be calculated is based on the peak demand of the service for the last 12 months. Retrieving this information from Toronto Hydro is currently not available online. When it was available, it was not a simple task and required the resident to print 52 weeks of hourly usage and manually look at the highest number, the peak demand. This information does not appear in the customer's bill, and there does not seem to be a person, process, or department that you can reliably call to obtain this information. This can be easily addressed, as all other hydro providers do, to provide a downloadable annual hourly peak consumption report in Excel format that they call this green button data. And Excel and other software can easily pick up the peak consumption and automatically with a few simple clicks. And this really makes it easier for us and for the customer when we're planning these installations. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make these comments.
And I thank you very much for the comments. And I would turn to my colleagues and see if there are any questions for Mr. Marmer. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to try to make this sound as least as a sales pitch as I possibly can. Mr. Marmer, can you tell us, for your average 10 kilowatt system, what the payback period is for the investment?
I would say it would be about 10 years.
About 10 years. And the equipment lasts?
I would say at least 25 years, maybe even more.
So the average household puts a 10 kilowatt system on their house. They make roughly enough energy to power their home, maybe 75% of it, and it's paid back in 10 years, and then they get 10, 15 years of free energy.
Yep, that's basically correct.
So we're essentially fixing the price of that energy. Can you tell us per kilowatt over the course of a 25-year installation what the cost of a kilowatt or of installed power is? Like a kilowatt hour of installed power, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, Councillor Layton.
Okay. It takes about 2 days to install the hardware on an or 2 or 3 days to install the hardware on an equipment, on a piece of equipment like that, correct?
Yeah, you need a couple of days on the roof and maybe a day to get the electrical down. 3 days is usually adequate for a 10 kilowatt system.
How long does it take to get approval for a system like that from Toronto Hydro?
6 months.
For 3 days of work for something that doesn't require any grid upgrades, it's 6 months of approval for a 10 kilowatt system.
Yeah, that's correct. Things just take time.
Thanks for taking the time out.
Thank you, Councillor Layton.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Are there any other members of the committee wishing to ask questions of the Deputy? Is that you, Deputy Mayor, just putting your hand up or just adjusting your camera?
I'm just adjusting my...
Okay, no, I just saw your hand there and I didn't know if you were wanting to ask questions. Okay, if there's no one else wanting to ask the Deputy questions, we can move on. And I'll thank you, Mr. Marmer, very much for your deputation and for your answers to Councillor Layton's questions. And I think that would bring us then to questions of staff. And I'll start with visiting members from council. There's Councillor Layton, he just moved around on the screen. You have some questions, I assume, Councillor?
Yes, and I'll try to be very brief because I was spending a lot of time on the Transform Fuel report. I didn't get as much time to review this report. There were some recommendations made by the Toronto Atmospheric Fund. Would you care to, could we have staff from Toronto Hydro comment on those recommendations?
Councillor, good morning. It's Amanda Klein here from Hydro, for those who don't know me. I'm the Executive Vice President Hydro who oversaw the development of our Climate Action Plan. And I have here with me Andrew Sasso, our Senior Director, who's been leading the development of the plan. I'm going to pass that first question to him.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. We just saw the letter posted this morning, so we haven't gone through it thoroughly just yet. The recommendations appear to be largely in line with what we have proposed in our plan for action, for ongoing engagement with city staff. We certainly do need to go through it more closely. We note that there are a couple in there about climate capital investments, which would require investments from the city itself. And so those certainly require additional conversation with city finance and others at the city.
The recommendations just made by the previous speaker, Mr. Marmer, do you think those are feasible? It seems to me like they wasn't asking for very much.
Yes, thank you. We did hear Mr. Marmer's feedback. A lot of great comments in there. We are always looking forward to that sort of feedback. We are, through our Utility of the Future initiative, going through a process of making more information available online to our customers, suppliers like himself. That's obviously a critical need, increasingly going forward. So he had a lot of very fair comments, and we'll certainly take those back.
Can I ask some questions about the climate advisory services? So in the report, it outlines sort of some of the targets for 2050. Let's look at the lease of heat pumps to residential and commercial customers and demonstration of retrofit projects. There's 60,000 projects, but we're probably going to have to retrofit closer to 800,000 homes. So we're seeing this as a demonstration project, and that like by 2030, our demonstration project will be done, and they'll be generally, this will be the way of business here. Like we're just proving a concept. Is that what you're outlining here in the proposal?
No, our proposal is that, Toronto Hydro wouldn't do everything. We're not proposing to do all of the building retrofits. We think that we can be a catalyst for action by the Toronto business community, the clean tech sector. But that's the approach that in Toronto Region Board of Trade submission on this matter, they strongly endorsed, as did the Pembina Institute. So we see ourselves not as piloting at all, but being a catalyst, getting large-scale projects moving quickly as soon as we get a mandate from City Council to do so.
The on EV charging, there's at some point in time, there's going to likely be a decision on whether or not everyone gets an individual charger at home, or there'll be charging stations, super rapid charging stations. In your model here for expanding electrification of transportation and EVs, are we banking on those larger installations, or the individuals all having chargers at home? Strikes me that I'd just add,
it's a combination of both. Based on the information, and we benefited greatly from feedback from city staff on this. Their EV strategy, which had come out a couple years ago, very helpful on this. Based on the number of chargers that we've proposed, a combination of level 2s and level 3s, level 3s being faster chargers, our expectation is those 50,000 public chargers would serve approximately 1 million EVs in Toronto. And now, recognizing that some of the Transform TO net zero strategy is also about increasing transit and other forms of commuting, we certainly don't want to overshoot, especially as there's a shared economy related to vehicles anyway, potentially autonomous driving as well. So, we're trying to be prudent and not overshoot the mark in terms of our proposal.
Thank you.
You finished your questions then, Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay. I see there. Yep, I see you arrived, and welcome, Councillor Fletcher. And over to you if you have some questions.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to know a little bit more about the EV charging. That's very, very popular, but seems to be going so very slowly. And could you just update us on that, please, and how you can move that faster? It's very much needed.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. There are approximately 1,000 public EV chargers in Toronto today. We've, of course, connected all of them. There are approximately 2,000, if I've got my numbers correct, EV chargers at homes behind the meter, which we've, of course, also connected. I think you're referring to the pilot, which is designed to test out certain applications.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Salazar.
The climate action plan is designed to do much more than a pilot.
Thank you. I'm actually interested in the one that I initiated last term, or maybe even before that, which was for permit parking where people don't have driveways, and not in buildings to have the electric charging stations on hydro poles. And I think there's a number of the pilots been going on for a long time. We've not had any data. I have noted that in the installation, I don't know if it was you or Transportation Services that was in charge of that. There was no consultation with councillors as to the best locations. So I am really interested in the pilot and extremely concerned that this is taking so long.
My understanding, Councillor, and perhaps somebody from Transportation Services, if they're on the line, could confirm, but my understanding is there's a report coming back to Council in relation to the pilot, I believe in January, if I've got the timeline correct. So I wouldn't want to get out ahead of that report on the results. I will just note that on page 65 of our plan, we do address how we would take the learnings from that pilot in order to better enable us to roll out the much larger, approximately 50,000 EV charger proposal that we've included in our climate action plan.
You do understand permit parking compared to regular parking or driveway parking or garage parking, just to be clear.
Yes, in the section I'm referring you to in our plan on page 65 is specifically with respect to on-street parking.
Okay, thank you. And as part of the plan to consult with councillors, so you get the areas that have the highest EV usage?
Yes, absolutely. Consultation with councillors is central to what we've put forward in the climate action plan. We understand and value the input that you and your colleagues provide.
And can you to explain why that didn't happen for the pilot?
With the pilot, we were looking at a number of different sort of very specific factors in order to fit within the parameters of what we could do as a pilot. Some of that is there are parameters just in terms of provincial regulation, in terms of what we can do under the auspices of a pilot. So there were some narrower considerations. When we're talking about large-scale deployment, we know that councils have great insights into where they could be most effectively deployed in their wards.
Staff need to finish, Mr. Chair. The interruption by the...
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor, but I only have 5 minutes and I've asked very specific question, and I really, really appreciate it within my 5 minutes if I could get a direct answer. It would be much appreciated.
Okay, but I'm fairly willing to give an extra minute if it avoids interrupting one person interrupting another. And so I just think it's one of those things. I could see you were trying to get in your questions. So why don't you ask your next question? And it's 4:18, and we'll let it run through until 6 minutes, and you could perhaps ask a question and get an answer in that time.
I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate staff answering direct questions. I asked about the parameters. Did they include the conversation with councillors as to the best locations, and what were the parameters that denied that? Then I'll make it a little more direct.
In relation to the pilot, councillor, I'm not in a position to speak to that today. All I know is that we had limitations in terms of where we could site them. We had extensive conversations with city staff about where to locate them, and there will be a report coming back, and perhaps when it comes back, we can speak more directly to your question, if that's all right.
Sure, I'll ask Transportation Services. And what were those limitations as far as having conversations with people that know the area best as to where the best location for those would be? I've never heard it yet.
Through the mayor to Councillor Fletcher, I certainly, and I'm assuming you can all hear me again, I don't know all the answers to those questions. I know we did a bit of limited engagement as part of this pilot, and we learned a lot during the pilot. And part of, as Andrew mentioned, part of what we're doing in January is coming back with a report that will have lots of findings, including the need for a much more comprehensive public consultation, not just about where it makes the most sense from a technology standpoint to place the chargers, but also to your point, as we've discussed previously, about highest and best use, and where you're actually going to have people who are going to benefit from the use of those chargers with their existing vehicles. So we have a lot of work to do there, and I'm hopeful that we can be more specific and crisp in our responses when we come back with the report in January.
Thank you, Ms. Gray, and thank you, Councillor
Thank you,
Fletcher.
Mr. Mayor, for the extra time.
Thank you, no problem.
Thank you for the extra time.
No problem, Councillor, thank you. Are there other questions of staff to do with the Toronto Hydro Climate Action Report? Is that you put it? Okay. Deputy Mayor, did you have your hand up? Deputy Mayor Minamong?
I'll wait for Ainsley and McKelvey.
Okay, fine. So I did see Councillor Ainsley's hand next, and then I saw Councillor McKelvey's, and then the Deputy Mayor. So, Councillor Ainsley, over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tory. I guess I'll start with Toronto Hydro staff, Andrew or Amanda. Could you explain a bit Toronto's vision for new sources of, I guess, non-large-scale hydroelectric power? I didn't see much comment about solar, wind, geothermal, or they call it biomass with carbon capture. I didn't see much of that outlined in your report.
Thank you, Councillor. So I think the way that we've structured our report is to try to have three interrelated legs of the stool. And within the expanded electricity distributor, that's really about making the investments so that the grid is capable of supporting households and businesses on that switch from carbon-based fuels to clean electricity. Certainly part of that, a significant part of that, is that getting to net zero is going to require different sorts of local generation, such as solar, such as storage, other fuel types that you've spoken about, expectations that over time businesses and households and communities will be exploring these technologies. But there's really three parts of it. It's that local generation, the energy efficiency, and then the grid working together as a network. And what we're focused on, particularly on the distribution side, is that net zero means that people are going to need more electricity, and they need to be able to plug into the local distribution grid to get that electricity, to feed their electricity in, and then to have backup for their local generation. So it's really about building the backbone of the grid so that people can plug in when they need it, taking into account as a given that there will be multiple local generation sources.
Okay. And then one of the reports that I was reading, it was done by the International Energy Agency. It estimated for the world to reach net zero by 2050, clean electricity generation has to increase by more than 2.5 times what it is today. I'm just wondering, as a distribution network, where do we fall into that? Where do you see that ratio being if we follow this plan by 2040?
That's certainly consistent with our expectations, and as you say, it's really around the world, an expectation that electricity usage will need to somewhere between double and triple, and that will need to, both from a supply and energy efficiency, a local generation perspective, as well as making sure that the grid is able to deliver it, ensure that we're making the investments. So our side of that is really the delivery side as the local distributor to ensure that the grid is capable of delivering the bulk supply portion, as well as enabling, that two-way relationship with electricity with the local generation.
And then within your report around financial support, I think the number was to maintain the debt equity ratio. There was, I think the number was $2 billion of financial support Toronto Hydro would need throughout the course of this plan to maintain that. So your credit rating is maintained. You would raise that from capital markets, or you're expecting the city and capital markets to provide that?
Thank you, Councillor. I believe we're getting into a confidential appendix of the report. I would just maybe for the purposes of discussion indicate that is something as far as the details of which is a matter of corporate finance and sort of securities issues. But maybe I can say in general terms that yes, certainly where the grid investments ramp up, there's two components to that. There is funding, which of course would have to go through an approval process through the regulator. And at this point, I would just highlight we are not proposing a rate change at this moment. This has been for the purposes of extrapolation to surface the need for the grid investment. And then there is a financing component of that. And the financing component certainly has a portion of debt, but there will need to be also new sources of equity as we get into that magnitude of the investment required in the grid.
Okay, and that's similar to on page 51, where it talks about $3.5 billion worth of unregulated climate action projects through customer and government contributions.
That actually, Councillor, is the second leg of the stool. So I was just speaking about the electricity grid and the investments that are there. The second leg of the stool is what we call the climate advisory services, and that is actually an unregulated function, which is really about us helping to remove barriers and enable projects in Toronto that things like electrifying transportation, enhancing energy efficiency of buildings, and building that local renewable generation and storage. And so what that would be is that's working directly with the customers to help them identify and implement personalized energy solutions. The grid side investments are really about ensuring the grid is there when people need to plug in, and that side's about helping deploy the funding. And what that $3.5 billion is that it represents, based on the current federal funding landscape, a magnitude sense of the federal funding we believe we could help deliver to Toronto, playing that climate advisory services role.
Okay, and then my last question, I don't know whether it's to Toronto Hydro or our city staff, is around EV charging. There's a very comprehensive plan here for looking at EV charging stations, but I've also been doing some reading, in particular Volvo, that at one point committed to being fully electric by 2030, talks about the high cost of battery production, for example, is 70% higher than a gasoline model vehicle, which drives up the cost of vehicles. I'm just wondering, as we model this out for EV charging stations, how we're balancing that out with the view of the private sector around charging stations.
Final question, thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Sure. I can comment on that, Councillor. Fernando Carew, I'm with the Environment and Energy Division, and like you said, actually, we're tracking that space, very closely. What we understand actually is, in fact, that battery technology actually is dropping in price about 50% every 4 years. So we're on track for cost parity between a battery electric vehicle and a regular vehicle, with the added benefit actually of gasoline savings in the order of $1,000 to $3,000 per household. So we foresee actually the electric vehicle in a matter of handful of years to in fact be an economic substitution. So result actually in total lower cost of ownership. And Councillor, you sit on the Toronto Hydro Board. The reality actually is that gasoline actually is 15 times more expensive than electricity. So once the cost of the vehicle actually reaches parity, this would be a great economic benefit to residents, businesses, and institutions in Toronto.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Tory. Those are my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Ainslie. Next, Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor. Can you outline how, through this report, it will be easier for people to connect solar panels? Because I hear this continually that it's quite the process, and it's very difficult. And how do you foresee Toronto Hydro being more of an enabler through this report?
A great question, and we do hear it sometimes. It's important to not lose track of the fact that we've connected well over 2,000 solar panels in Toronto. So we have a lot of success. There are some areas of the city that are constrained. The expanded electricity distributor is designed not just to ensure that more load capacity exists, but more generation capacity exists, local generation capacity exists. Both are important. The city's modeling, as we've understood it, anticipates about half of the future incremental load related to electrification is going to come from distributed energy resources like those solar panels. So we've incorporated that into our assessment. I think the TAF letter that was referred to earlier, asks the question, did you do it? The answer is yes, we did. We also know that as a matter of provincial policy, this isn't just a Toronto issue in terms of connecting distributed energy resources like solar systems, PV systems. It's a province-wide issue. So we're actually involved with an Ontario Energy Board working group. We instigated it in cooperation with DER companies. Toronto Hydro was the lead. We developed a solution with DER companies. We co-proposed it to the OEB, and that's now going through the regulatory process to streamline those processes and ensure that our connection process can be updated while at the same time maintaining the safety and reliability of the grid, not just for the connecting customer, but everybody in their neighborhood.
I think the short answer to that was yes, that's part of the plan, is to facilitate this process. Okay. LEDs, there's a lot of talk about LEDs, but I know that there was a back off of LEDs because it was decided that in terms of carbon, because the grid is clean right now at that time, that it wasn't going to be the best investment if the goal was a decrease in emissions. So why has the thought around that changed? And if we have to prioritize between LEDs versus, EVs and investing in electric vehicles, like how do we balance the prioritization between that?
That will be a council decision. It's a climate capital investment in Part 3 of our plan. Amanda referred to Parts 1 and 2 previously. Part 3 is climate capital investments. LED streetlights is an option. There are a lot of benefits to LED streetlights, some from a climate perspective, but even more so financially for the city, as well as improved lighting and safety in neighborhoods. We've seen well over 300 municipalities in Ontario go this road. And it's an option, but as you say, it is about trade-offs. There's limited money available, and it's certainly a choice between investing in LED streetlights versus other types of technologies such as EV chargers, as you suggested.
Is there anywhere between yourselves and the city a critical path analysis to get to net zero? So, if we don't do this by this date, we don't do that by that date, we won't make it. And I ask that because, for example, some sort of critical path analysis could help with this question of where to invest first and where to prioritize. So what is the status of those discussions? Because based on this conversation around LEDs versus, EVs and where to put the money, I'm not sure we're there yet. So what has happened in terms of a critical path analysis?
We've spent the summer and the spring and the summer since we were commissioned to do this plan back in April, working with Josie, Nancy, and their team to ensure that alignment, do our best to facilitate that alignment, and ensure compatibility and that we're rowing in the same direction. And we certainly believe that this plan is consistent with the city net zero strategy. In terms of how choices will be made, in terms of the expanded electricity distributor, we have a mandate already. It's the very essence of what we are as a provincially regulated distributor to move forward with that through the regulatory processes. That isn't to say that exactly what we have in the plan will get approved. It has to go through a public OEB process. And that would be developed.
I'm going to squeeze in one more quick question. Sorry, I'm out of time.
So
the city is
a process to come.
sorry, I have to squeeze my last one in. The city is looking to do a carbon budget. How does that incorporate into your plans, and is that something that Toronto Hydro will also commit to?
Our understanding of the carbon budget is for city operations. To the extent that it incorporates ABCs, then I expect we will hear from the city in that regard.
Okay. That was the final question for Councillor McKelvey, and I thank you for questions and answers. That moves us to the Deputy Mayor, Menon Wong, who asked for some questions.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. First question is, I'm told that Toronto uses about, what, 5,000 megawatt, is it megawatts? Is that the term per day? Is that the energy that we use?
That's our peak.
That's your peak. So that's generally what we need. And by 2040, that's going to increase by, what, 2 or 3 times?
Correct, Deputy Mayor.
And so if we actually want to, by 2040, that we want to go to net zero, we're going to need 3 times the energy available to backfill or to provide the energy. If we go to net zero, we're going to need 3 times the amount of energy. Is that fair to say as well?
Yes, it's generally 2 to 3 times in Toronto, Ontario, across the world, correct.
And so that means that we're going to have to build at least 2 more nuclear reactors the size of Darlington. Is also fair to say?
I don't know how we would get there. I think I would note that the IESO is currently undertaking an analysis about this right now.
And but if it would be 2 or 3 times, let's say that a Darlington to build would cost about $25 billion. Is that fair to say as well?
I'd have to check what the cost of that is. I honestly don't know what the cost of Darlington was.
Or would be now. And if we wanted to do that, we'd have to get on our horse actually right now to start building it. Not necessarily hydro. You just deliver the electricity, but our provincial friends would have to, get on their horse. They'd have to do environmental assessments, construction, all that sort of stuff. We're actually almost behind it if we were to try to do that. Is that fair to say as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that, so maybe just to take a step back, the IESO in Ontario, they recently released a report providing some preliminary numbers. They indicated that it would cost approximately $27 billion to retire and replace the natural gas generation at the provincial grid by 2030. And the Minister of Energy has now asked them to do the next phase of that work, which is including developing an achievable path to zero emissions in the electricity sector. That report is actually due next fall, and I would expect that they would explore some of those themes.
So you're just the deliverer of the electricity. So there will also be costs in terms of on your grid, on your side of the 20%. It's what 20% is delivery. Is that what?
Yeah, it's about 1/3 of the bill right now.
1/3 of the bill.
From a bill perspective, is the delivery charge. So I think what you're suggesting is so there's 2 components to it. There's the cost of generating the incremental electricity to serve those incremental needs. That's about 2 to 3 times. And then there would be the costs associated with upgrading the infrastructure that delivers the electricity. That would be in part the transmission and then the distribution grid. So our climate plan, we talk about the one piece of this, which is the magnitude and the costs of the upgrade to the local distribution grid that would support that net zero future.
Right. And so, but we're looking at like massive, to do this would be massive increases in the ratepayers' bill. Like I'm going to see like a pretty big increase in the amount for families all across the city. There's going to be a huge increase in electricity bills, right?
Certainly fair to say that across the country and the world, we're going to need to contend with that all-important question of affordability and pace, certainly.
And then in Europe, they tried to, close down all sorts of generation facilities and they relied on wind and solar and all that sort of stuff. And now, right now, facing massive increases because of electricity shortages. Are you aware of that?
I'm in general terms aware of it, but I am certainly not an expert on Europe's electricity grid.
So pace is really important, though. If you look at, wanting to move too fast. If you move too fast and there's an electricity shortage, that, you could be, from a delivery of electricity point of view, we could be really disadvantaging in cost and in terms of supply the residents of the city. Is that also fair to say?
I think it's fair to say that affordability and pace is absolutely something that we need to confront on the path to net zero, and that's going to be true for every aspect of the transition, including grid investments.
Do we have that pace right now, or do you think that, like net zero 2040 or 2050, what's the right pace?
I don't know that I can give you an opinion on what the right pace is. What I can say is that the city staff very helpfully shared with us some of their draft modeling around the net zero picture. And what we were able to do is provide an extrapolation of what that would look like on the grid investment side. And so I think we start to have a picture of the need for the investment. But I can't tell you exactly what the right pace would be. I'm sure that others are more well placed to talk about the other side of that picture as well.
And for our government to go net zero, I saw somewhere a cost of something like $57 billion. Are you aware of that number?
I would refer that to city staff. I'm not sure.
And also for the city to go like away from furnaces, et cetera, and for the outside, I saw a number of $150 billion. Is that also a question for someone other than yourself?
Final question.
Yes, I think those are questions for city staff, Deputy Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Now, just have a look at the members of the committee, if I may, and see if there's anybody else that has questions. There we go. Yeah, there's Deputy Mayor Thompson, so over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good morning to everyone. The report that's in front of us, it's a report that requires collaboration between all parties, the city and other agencies. Is that correct? You're not submitting this report suggesting that we advance and obviously take action on the report. There is an expectation that it will be digested and obviously a more fulsome report will come forward, right, with respect to costing as well as a bit of a game plan that incorporates other partners. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Tory, that is absolutely correct. There's more work for us to do.
Right. Can someone help me to understand? Obviously, there's a great reliance on going forward on electricity and so on. I wanted to understand how is the city connected now? And I realize what the work of Toronto Hydro is, and it is a distributor. But how is the city connected now from Niagara Falls? Is it one major trunk or pipe wire that comes through that connects the city, and then we basically derive our electric resources from that?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Toronto receives power from a number of sources, including Niagara Falls. We have power coming in from nuclear stations in the Bruce Peninsula, up east in currently Pickering and Darlington, and Pickering is slated to close within the next few years. But it's important to note we also have generation closer to home. Some of that is natural gas powered in this region, and some of it, which has been referred to during this session, distributed energy resources, are things like solar panels that are located within Toronto itself. So it's right. There's a whole mix of different sources of supply.
Right. Thank you for that, and that's the answer I was looking forward to. So, given that that's the case, and what they're intending and hoping to do, how are we then preparing ourselves for the next generation of workers? How are we planning to scale up and tool up with respect to the required work that needs to be done? Are we working with our colleges and our institutions to ensure that we have the sort of talent coming through the pipeline to help us, because there's going to be a huge demand for workers? Would you not agree? I don't know who's answering that question.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, certainly. That this absolutely, has to be a critical part on the march to net zero as we are investing in the local economy, both through the need on our side to invest more in the grid through our work in climate advisory services. If we're provided the mandate to do that, we certainly expect to be directly and indirectly working with the local economy, areas like construction, clean tech, utility services. For context, Toronto Hydro, we currently employ about 1,300 employees, and we support a large community. Capital program last year was just over 600 million. We have extremely strong relationships with local colleges and institutions, and we actually have developed our own in-house apprenticeship program. Notwithstanding that, yes, it will absolutely be critical to ramp up those activities.
And then my final question is around planning and building designs and so on. Is that part of what you're looking at in terms of this transformation that will need to take place going forward as part of, the climate action plan and transform TO?
I apologize, Deputy Mayor, but the first part of your question cut out there.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry. I was asking about the planning and sort of building designs and so on. I'm just wondering, how is that all incorporated with respect to the objective here, and how to create better designs of buildings to ensure they're more efficient and just taking advantage of sort of natural sunlight and wind flow and things like that?
I mean, I would definitely agree with that. I would refer the specifics of that probably to my colleagues, the city manager and his team, because I believe this is specifically what they talk about.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So, Fernando, if you could answer that question, please.
Thank you, Chris. And Deputy Mayor, you're exactly right. Actually, Transform TO has essentially both a net zero new building strategy, the Toronto Green Standard, right, with the goal actually of net zero buildings by 2030. So in other words, the city will not be approving applications for new development that are not zero emissions, right? At the same time, we know that the existing buildings sector actually is also the larger emitter. So we had before you in July the existing buildings net zero strategy. But what I like your point actually about the industrial strategy, and this will require people and equipment and all that. Deputy Mayor, we're at a time actually that is very exciting. Given that for the first time in history, we're able to store electricity locally and economically. The fact that batteries prices are plummeting, 50% every 4 years, in fact, are causing both the disruption, but also represent the solution. So imagine actually these batteries on wheels, essentially cause a disruption in terms of the consumption, right? Household would actually increase their consumption about 30%. But at the same time, that same battery technology, stationary, with software, represents a solution, right? It's remarkable actually how we are not storing electricity. Historically, it's been expensive, right? So this represents a paradigm shift. And in fact, there's a project that Toronto Hydro is working with the ISO in downtown Toronto, which is a virtual power plant, right? So that's the example actually of the stationary battery with software, which in reality actually then does not necessitate the large brute force approach, shock and awe that we were discussing a second ago. This will not be a scenario where we are going to be doubling the lanes on the 401, respect to electricity, right? This will be a scenario where batteries and solar will be the solution at the distribution scale. And it will bring a era actually of innovation and economic prosperity for Toronto, including trades and engineering. And the company actually that is doing the virtual power plant, EnerStore, it is a Toronto company, been incubated by Mars.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's our last question. Thanks so much, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Are there others wishing to ask questions? Just get the screen back here for 1 sec. There we go. I don't see anybody. I just had a couple, if I might then. Just put the clock on there. And it's of our friends at Hydro, and I don't know which one would be able to answer. I had an interesting discussion just last night with the CEO of Siemens Canada, and he was talking to me about a pilot project they were doing in New Brunswick where, and I will misdescribe this in only the way an amateur could, where they were using a lot of power that existed kind of in the system to sort of draw it back out. And he was making the point that within the city of Toronto, he told me, I think the number was 500 megawatts of power kind of existed at any point in time. And that before we started talking about building new nuclear or things like that, that there was this power that you could draw back out of the system and make use of, and in effect compensate somebody for the fact that you were going to use that power, and they would then use it later. I mean, I'm totally mangling the description of this, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, and they have a fairly unique pilot project underway in New Brunswick to demonstrate this technology in two towns there, two cities. Is that something, because I didn't see any reference to anything, I sort of maybe didn't read carefully enough, but I think I did. I didn't hear any sort of mention of that kind of thing in the context of our own plans to unlock, if I can use the word, more electricity for use sort of when it's needed. Do you follow along what I was describing at all?
Thank you, Mayor. That's the sort of thing that we've talked about in the context of climate advisory services. It's what the Pembina Institute really tuned us into. You know, these sorts of opportunities across the country, you know, they're a national organization looking for climate opportunities, and I think that their support was absolutely critical in giving us the insights that we needed. Of course, we're also, as you know, very engaged across the country through the Canadian Electricity Association. We've won awards for them for sustainability, for doing projects like the ones that you're talking about with Siemens in out east. It's likely demand response, which you will see if you have that label and look through our plan. Demand response is within the scope of what we've talked about. It is an opportunity in Toronto. There is demand response going on. In fact, the project that Fernando referred to is a demand response program where you use the energy capabilities of existing buildings. A neat innovation on that is vehicle to grid, where eventually electric vehicles will be able to do something rather similar. Not just be consumers of power, but distribute them back. And you know, if we've got something in the range of 1.5 million vehicles in Toronto, plus all the fleets, plus all of the delivery vehicles, it creates some really interesting and exciting opportunities for the future. You know, if you imagine an outage where instead of customers being out for a prolonged period of time, we were able to send out, you know, essentially an Uber call to have vehicles descend upon a neighborhood that for some reason can't receive power, connect those EVs to the grid, and bring that community back to life for a period of time. Those are the kinds of really exciting innovations that we're working on with other utilities, with clean tech, and we want to do more of as part of our climate action plan.
Well, I thank you for that answer, and I'll just point out that was exactly the kind of example he gave me, the gentleman last night, with regard to an outage and saying that you could actually use kind of this, literally down to using private vehicles to try and help you to sort of deal with that sort of thing, and he gave the same example of how Uber, for whatever people may think of it, it provides an additional element of an overall transportation system. He used that exact example, and my concluding question would be, should we expect Toronto Hydro is going to take the initiative to participate? Because I said to him, did you consider us as opposed to going to New Brunswick? And he sort of said, well, New Brunswick came forward and said they wanted to do this. Are we thinking that as part of this advisory or this innovative business part of your report that we're going to be taking the lead to do more things like that, to try some things like that out, as opposed to waiting around for Ontario to do it or waiting around for New Brunswick to do it? Is that something that is contemplated, an activist approach to sort of try things that make sense? I mean, not everything and anything. Is that the tenor of that kind of part of the report that recommends this kind of second stream of business, as it were?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, certainly it is. And what we've done is we've provided some optionality for council to consider in terms of the how. The advisory services model is about facilitating and helping others, and responds to a lot of calls that we heard from stakeholders that there is a gap in that market to help businesses and residents overcome barriers that are needed to really stimulate getting projects off the ground and also moving beyond pilots to scale. So really trying to be ambitious and bold in that. There's also an opportunity on, climate capital investments, which could be used for areas such as EV charging, for example, as the city wishes to pursue them. The idea here is that Hydro could pursue a build, own, operate model where there's no clean tech market interest, where there's insufficient government subsidies available to make the project economically feasible. So again, working within the framework, but stretching the limits of it to propel us forward for the net zero future.
Thanks very much. Those are my questions, and if there are no other persons wishing to ask questions of staff, then we could move to speakers. And I'll ask first if the members of council visiting the executive committee today wish to speak. Councillor Fletcher, do you wish to say a few words, or?
Yes, I do, and I will simply apologize again for having pushed so hard to get crisp answers, but this is obviously something that I think we're missing out on. And I would probably be asking Ms. Gray when we get to council just how many streets there are in the city that have permit parking. It's thousands of them, and how many thousands of homes have permit parking, because these are areas that don't have a driveway, don't have a garage, don't have a plug-in, and it creates an issue for people in the downtown area, in the old city of Toronto has permit parking, and now East York and parts of Swansea, etc., that we've introduced it, that there's a simple logical thing, which is using our existing hydro poles. And I'm going to find when that motion was made, and it was myself and Councillor McMahon that made that motion, probably 5 or 6 years ago. Then it was very difficult to get a pilot, and then these Flow, I think we've partnered with a company named Flow, and that the installation took a long time. I guess that's working out the nuts and bolts of that. But also, I simply don't think there was enough consideration as to where they were put. For example, the whole thing in the pilot project came about because an individual who lived in Riverdale wanted to buy a car that was electric, and he couldn't plug it in and have that cross the street and run across the sidewalk from his permit parking spot. That just seems pretty simple. That one might go back and take ground zero and put in the charger because there's already interest there. So I don't know how this happened. We still can't get the information on how well used it is. And I am seemingly quite frustrated by this. There's a project that was at I&E recently called the Pocket Change, which is a community that has undertaken, it's a well-known little community kind of tucked in between the Greenwood Yards and Jones Avenue and the Danforth and a lot of rail. And they have a movement to go to net zero carbon as quickly as possible, doing home retrofits, and our energy and efficiency office has been really great at that. And I would just ask that Toronto Hydro be part of that in a more deep way, including this place that had the very first community in Toronto that ever had car share was there. They had an option for cars in somebody's driveway that people could take. So they're really ahead of the curve, and that would have been a great location for a plug-in. Riverdale would have been a great location for a plug-in. And I think it's really important that, and we'll see this information when it comes back, to really see if we maximize the efforts here to have a successful pilot, or were many of these places in locations where people really haven't bought EVs yet. I'm really worried it's number 2, and that it's going to look like there's not really an appetite there, when I think and believe there is an appetite in many communities, and we should be assisting that. We should be finding ways to assist people who want to buy an EV in parts of the city where we know there aren't garages, we know there aren't driveways. So I just really want a little bit of focus on that, and I know Ms. Gray is looking into that, and I hope Mr. Sasso understands my concern here, that great to have these charging stations in TPA lots, in private, in condos, in garages, in homes, in front parking, but it's really a big, we're missing out on reducing the emissions on so many streets that are already dense, where people are driving downtown, driving around the neighborhood. So I'm really hoping we can overcome that. I look forward to the other report that's coming forward, but I guess everybody now knows how interested I am in that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Then I would just have a look here now. Sorry, there we are. Councillor Layton's not on my screen, but I assume you're still here, Councillor Layton? He's not? Interesting. Okay, well, I will give him dispensation to speak if he comes back. Maybe he had to step away for a moment, I don't know. Then we could move to speakers from the Executive Committee then. I don't think there's any other councillors that I see on my screen that are with us. So are there other councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Ainsley, go ahead.
Tory, I want to thank both our own staff and Toronto Hydro staff for working on this report to date. I want to thank the two deputants that came in this morning. For me, this is really about a transition from to clean energy, and it's not about sacrificing our way of life, but really it's improving it. And there's many different components, from electrical vehicle stations, which my residents ask about all the time. They see it more often than not in the local plazas and want to know what the city's doing about it. One of the issues in Scarborough, which is related to pedestrian safety, people out and about at night often ask about LED lights and being in other jurisdictions, and why the city's not more advanced in its installation of LED lights. Things like solar power, wind power, geothermal, carbon emissions. There are many different components to this. I'm glad that Toronto Hydro's planning out for this, that it's going to be at the forefront of this. Yes, it's going to be expensive, but we also have a very important role to play in climate change as we try and protect our environment as we move forward to the target at 2050. So I'm fully supportive of this. I'm looking forward to the next reports and the ongoing work that is done as we fight climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Other members of the committee wishing to speak? Again, is that your hand up there, Deputy Mayor? Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I did want to thank Hydro for all the work they've done. They've been really good partners in all of these arrangements, and have taken their shareholders' instructions quite seriously. I, like many, believe that there is a really significant impact based on climate change, and we need to do something about it. But I think we need to have, a lot more conversations about not only what we want to do, but the cost that it's going to have on ratepayers and taxpayers. We saw what happened when the Ontario government moved very, very fast, probably too fast, with the green energy plan and the costs associated with this. We see what's happened in Europe with regard to their overly aggressive and optimistic approach with regard to energy and the massive increases in electricity rates that are taking place. We have to have a serious conversation and a realistic conversation of the costs that are going to, the work that needs to be done, and the costs that are going to be impacted. It's going to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Some of this won't be borne by the city, but a large portion of it will. And those costs are real costs that are going to be incurred by families all across this city and all across this province. And so we talk a lot about what we want to do, but we don't spend enough time talking about how much it's going to cost. And the second thing is the pace of this. We do need to act too quickly, but if we act too quickly, we are going to make mistakes, and we are going to put the public at risk, in my view, in terms of providing a reliable energy source. So this debate requires, I think, a balance between what we need to accomplish, how we need to accomplish it, when we need to do it, how fast we can do it, but also what sacrifices and what are the financial considerations that are involved. That's the complete discussion that we need to have. And right now, I think there's a focus, on moving quickly, but there are a whole lot of other elements that need to balance out that discussion. And I think we need to have that balanced conversation in this discussion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Sorry, here, stopping the clock, resetting I have Councillor McKelvey. Let me just see if there's others. Okay, Councillor McKelvey, please, your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a big step forward in that we have major agencies that are starting to have discussions together. So Toronto Hydro, through this report, is now starting to work with the Energy and Environment Division at the city. Both this week and last week, we had comments from the Toronto Atmospheric Fund. I think this process has identified that we do all need to work together in a better way to reach our goal of being net zero by 2040. I also think that this conversation has identified that we do need to look at priorities and what those priorities are. What are the best investments to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions? And what is the critical path forward for success? Because I don't know that we've entirely identified all those dates that we have to meet to be successful. So I'm sure that this conversation will continue to evolve. There are reports back in Q2 2022 on this subject. I look forward to reading those and a continued conversation around this. But I do not want us to forget, despite all these discussions that happen that are really looking at refinements on plans, that we made a huge commitment last Thursday through the Infrastructure and Environment Committee through acceptance of the report to set our new target to 2040. I look forward to that coming to Council next week and Council making that a decision to be ambitious, to be bold, and to make a better future for us all.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Others wishing to speak? Okay, well, I would like to speak, and I have a motion. And let me just reset the clock here. And we'll just ask the clerk if she could just put the motion up. And it relates to really just trying to incorporate some of the suggestions that and recommendations that Councillor Layton has made in his letter to the Executive Committee to ensure that they're given consideration. And it just really amends the the current recommendations coming from the city manager in respect of further collaborative consultation and analysis of these matters by Hydro and the city staff going forward. I would just like to start my remarks by thanking Hydro, because I think what's been done here, and I was pleased, and I don't want to put words in the mouths of the deputants, but I was pleased at the fact that there was an acknowledgement that some, what I'll call the building blocks, were to be found in this report. And as I said in the response that I gave to the release of the Net Zero report, I am very committed as mayor to acting and to moving forward with this. This is not just a series of reports. These are serious goals put in place to address an incredibly serious matter. And they're goals that, while they're ambitious, I think are possible for us to achieve, and therefore we have to move forward with actually taking the steps. And I think the Hydro report has quite a few of the building blocks that are going to be part of that solution, because there is no question but that Hydro is an indispensable, necessary partner for us in achieving the goals that we're trying to achieve as a city. But I think precisely the kind of analysis done in a collaborative manner and putting, as the first deputant said, Ms. Kalapos, putting the two reports together and making sure they're aligned is a necessity. Because Hydro's role has to be defined within the context of the overall climate action plan, and the overall climate action plan has to take into account Hydro's role and the practicalities related to that. I think, for example, and one of the reasons I didn't just move, Councillor Layton's recommendations, and he will be free to do so if he wishes at the City Council, but something like, and it's not, I don't think specifically referred to in his report, but something like Councillor Ainsley just talked about LED lighting. I ask myself the same question. Why are we not further along in that? than we are as a city. And of course, the fundamental question that probably both explains that and is in front of us for further discussion and analysis is, how is it going to get paid for? And I'm sorry to be so practical when it comes to, how I look at these things as a mayor and a member of council and someone who's anxious to see us proceed with these plans. But when you're talking about, a very substantial sum of money to achieve something that could be very helpful to us and that is included in the hydro report and otherwise, you better be able to answer the question, how are you going to pay for it? Similarly, with the expansion to the grid, I'm in no position to know, in the discussion I was having last night with the CEO of Siemens, focused on the fact that I had just received this report, as we all did, saying the ratepayers should expend $10 billion on the grid. I don't have any doubt that something needs to be done to address the question of supply in light of the fact we're now going to have cars and buildings and all kinds of other things relying on electricity, hopefully less of it with retrofitting and so on, but electricity nonetheless. And something has to be done in that regard. But I'm in no position to judge whether that's a $10 billion expansion to the grid. But we sure have to answer the question, well, all right, is it a $10 billion expansion? And if so, how is it going to get paid for? The same with the questions the Deputy Mayor asked with respect to natural gas. If you bring it right down to the householder level and assume that we're going to only be able to end our reliance on natural gas or significantly, dramatically reduce it if we take account of all the residential use that is made, then you do have the question of, I presume, hundreds of thousands of furnaces, for example, in people's homes that would have to be replaced by some other means that are identified in these reports. And so I think, again, the practicality of it all just says, well, all right, if that's an objective you're going to set out to achieve, which we may well have to do, how are we going to do that, starting with the question not of the technology and which technology you put into people's homes, but who's going to pay for it? And people can just say, oh, well, don't worry, it'll all get looked after. Well, unfortunately, life doesn't work that way in terms of whether it's a city budget, the hydro budget, and the two are related because they send us a dividend of $100 million a year. And, I told the CEO when we first had a conversation about this that, it would be great to be able to just say, well, fine, we'll do a lot of this stuff and just not send you a dividend anymore. So that would be $100 million a year to be able to invest in all of this. That would be terrific, except we can't afford to just blithely give up the $100 million in dividends without answering these broader series of questions as to how you finance all this. So my motion is meant to incorporate some of the suggestions, some of which I don't fully, when I say understand, I'm not embarrassed to say that. I'm not an expert in these matters, and Councillor Layton, I respect his knowledge and his commitment to this, so that his recommendations in this letter he wrote to the Executive Committee will be incorporated into the review to be done by Hydro and the City Manager, and they'll report back in Q2, including, and that's the second part of the motion, implementation plans that could begin as early as 2022, because again, time is marching on. So those are my comments. I do thank Hydro for this report, which I think is a good start. I think we have work to do with them, and I think we will do that work as one means of moving forward on achieving our objectives. Any other speakers or comments, questions of the mover? Otherwise, we can move then to the question. Everybody's ready? Okay, I think I see no other hands. Then I think the first thing would be to consider my motion, and I will ask for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And the item as amended, the City Manager's recommendations as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, thank you very much. Now, here I have the next item, 28.6 would be the next item that we have to consider, and it is the rate-supported budgets, water. It's actually, I mean, we won't deal with them all together per se, but the next three are the rate-supported budgets, all held by Councillor Crawford, who wanted to make some remarks, and whether you wish to do that together, Councillor Crawford, or do it one at a time is in your hands entirely, but you held the item down. I'll first ask, there are no deputations, I'll ask if there are questions of staff. Seeing none, then I would move on 28.6 to speakers, and Councillor Crawford, you held the item down.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I just want to say this is the beginning of the, really the official beginning of the 2022 budget season at the City of Toronto. We are still in a COVID year, as we all know. That includes the budgets of the City of Toronto, of which the three rate-based budgets, water, solid waste, and Toronto Parking Authority are those. So we have been asked, the City Manager has asked us agencies and divisions as they're looking at their operating and the capital budgets to really look at the financial impacts and challenges we've had on COVID. These three budgets are part of that, looking at, how do we prioritize the recovery efforts, looking for every opportunity to make environmental and socially responsible investments and to make Toronto a more equitable and sustainable place to live. When you're looking at these budgets, and first of all, I want to thank all, I'm going to speak to them all at the same time, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay. Wanted to thank, of course, Lou DiGeronimo. I want to thank Matt Kelleher and Scott Collier on the work that they have been doing this past year to ensure that their budgets not only are fiscally responsible, but they're delivering the important services of water and solid waste to the city, and of course parking. Parking, by the way, this will be a profitable year for them. The last year has not been. Toronto Water will be delivering, approximately 435 billion liters of safe water, 400 billion liters of wastewater. Their budget, their capital budget will be $1.4 billion, $15 billion over the 10 years. The highest capital expenditure or the highest capital spend in the city comes from Toronto Water. Both Toronto Water and solid waste will be having 3% increases. These 3% increases all go towards capital. They have managed to deal with their operating side. So all the money that Toronto taxpayers are going to be putting into these budgets will go into capital. And I just again want to thank the work that all of these teams have been doing. There are times we sometimes, I wouldn't say push, but these budgets go through the process fairly quickly, and sometimes it doesn't give them justice of the work that the staff are doing. Also, too, I want to thank the budget committee for their work over the last number of weeks on these budgets. And I'll be moving, I'll move all these, but I'll speak to them, speaking to, as I said, Mr. Mayor, to all three at the same time, and we'll move these off to City Council in another week for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Crawford. I'll deal with these, even though the councillor indicated he was going to deal with them all together. I'll just go through and see if anybody has comments on each of these items individually, and we'll take his comments as applying to all three. Councillor Crawford's, that is. Are there any other people wishing to speak to item 28, EX 28.6, the waste and wastewater budget for 2022? Okay, well then, while we're doing that, then we might as well then move, let me just find don't have it here in front of me, the staff recommendation. I guess the recommendation coming from the Budget Committee. It's a letter coming from the Budget Committee with recommendations. Councillor Crawford has moved those, and I'll call the question if there's no one else wanting to comment. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Then 28.7, Councillor Crawford's remarks apply to those to that item as well. It's the solid waste budget. Are there any other people wishing to make comments on the solid waste budget? If not, then I will similarly put in front of you the moved by Councillor Crawford, the recommendations contained in the letter coming from the Budget Committee, and call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And finally, item EX 28.8, the rate supported budget for the Toronto Parking Authority. Are there any other councillors, members of the committee, wanting to speak on the matter of the Parking Authority budget, rate supported budget?
Mayor, it's Councillor Ainsley.
Yes.
I did have questions of staff on this.
I'm sorry, I apologize. You know what? You're perfectly right in moving through. That's fine. Let me go back. I guess we did vote, but
Yep.
Did I miss over 28.7, the solid waste questions of staff? Okay, well, if there were none, then that's fine. We voted on that and approved that. So then we will go to questions of staff, and I apologize for that, which is for the EX 28.8, and we would ask you to go ahead with your questions then, Councillor Ainsley. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Tory. Are Toronto Parking Authority staff available?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I did want to ask, sorry, Scott. I did want to ask about my understanding in 2021 from the reading I've done that the average revenue per spot was $1,300 or about $25 a spot. And Toronto Parking Authority's goal is to get it back to a pre-COVID $3,100 a spot or about $60 a spot. I don't know if my math is correct. Is that fairly accurate?
In 2022, next year, we're forecasting we will not return to pre-COVID levels, i.e. 2019 levels, until at the earliest 2023. So there will be a material improvement in 2022. We will move from a blended average of about a 52 index versus 2019 in 2021 to about a 72% next year. So there is material improvement based on the runway of the last 4 or 5 months, actually the last 5 months. But we are, in light of the new hybrid working model and the continued noise regarding different variants and such, we don't expect a full return. So that will impact all our channels of business, and specifically off-street and on-street. And remarkably, they're performing similarly. One would think that street would be performing much better than garages and lots, but that is currently not the case.
Okay. And I just wanted to ask about your pricing model. I've done some reading on other jurisdictions, specifically in the States, like San Francisco and Seattle and California. They look at more of a performance-based parking approach when it comes to pricing. The pricing changes throughout the day, and from the driving I have done, in particular in the downtown core, we have daytime parking and we have evening parking, and I'm just wondering if revenue-wise, if the Toronto Parking Authority would be better off moving to more of a pricing approach than what you see in those jurisdictions. Strategically, we aspire to do just that. That will require significant material investment in our technology to allow us to execute a more dynamic-based pricing, one that reflects demand. And of course, demand varies across the city, not only on street pricing and in garage parking in our lots. So, we'll be talking to our board and of course council in time in terms of how we gravitate towards that. But it's absolutely the right thing to do, not only from a financial standpoint, but it's a more appropriate in order to maximize our support of our customers' needs, etc. Okay. And how do you, if you had a crystal ball, Scott, how do you see that playing out? Like, is that a 2-year model, or, something you're looking at doing in 5 years? Well, knock on wood, we're out of COVID. That's a great question. I keep reminding my board and my staff all the time, we can achieve anything at the GPA, just not everything. So I'll say to you, within our 5-year strategic window, that should be a priority. It took us 4 years to get it up and running at the airport, which is a parking business as big as the TPA. So it is doable. I will commit that we'll start small, do some prototyping, probably in some garages to get the learning from that. The street parking is more complex for the reasons we know, but certainly continue to push us to go faster over the next 5-year strategic window. Okay. And then in terms of the pricing changes that I was just talking about, so currently on-street parking, those prices get reviewed every 3 years, and off-street parking is every year? I think I'd have to ask Jeff D, who's on the call, in terms of our frequency, but I think you will see from us, pricing should be reviewed constantly, quite frankly, and more formally as it relates to council on an annual basis, because the market is evolving. Our expectations of how parking performs as a mobility solution within the city, I think we need to be more proactive and a little, a greater sense of urgency in terms of how to leverage pricing to drive different consumer behavior. And I think there's an opportunity going forward to do that even within my portfolio, let alone the portfolio writ large across the city. So you'll see more from that from us going forward. Okay. Thank you, Scott. Those are my questions, Meritori.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Other questions of staff on the Toronto Parking Authority EX 28.8 rate supported budget? Okay. Again, I apologize for overseeing that as I was trying to move through all 3 items. I had forgotten about stopping on each one for questions. So then we would come to speakers beyond Councillor Crawford's remarks, which we've already taken as noted, applying to all 3 items, 6, 7, and 8. Are there any other people wishing to speak to the Toronto Parking Authority budget? Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Meritori. And I want to thank Mr. Collier for answering my questions. Meritori, for your indulgence for allowing me to go back and ask questions of staff. I just think it's important as we're moving out of COVID, or trying to move out of COVID, that we look at the revenue that the Toronto Parking Authority is bringing in, not only because we use it to pay down debts, fund facility expansion programs, and as a city councilor as well, important for the city's use, but we need to make sure that commuters are benefiting from it as well. And, you know, I think what you want to see, when every driver wants to see, is when you arrive, there's a parking space waiting for you. Because if there isn't, you're just going to drive around more. And I've experienced both that, and I've also experienced driving downtown lately where I park at a slot and I look at the incredible low price that I pay for parking on street all day, and I look at an adjacent commuter lot that's privately owned and the rate that they pay, and I park on the street. But I also park on the street the reason I park on the street, it's a much discounted rate. And I think we really need to have the Toronto Parking Authority looking at a much more dynamic, performance-based parking approach. It'll help with the revenue. I think it will help us decreasing traffic congestion, decreasing carbon emissions and air pollution, which we just talked about in the previous item around climate change. And I don't think we can fix any of that by subsidizing cars or building more parking lots if we're not using the right parking price approach. So I once again thank staff for the information. I look forward to seeing the changes, and I bring it back to you, Mayor Tory. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Others wishing to speak on this item 28.8, EX 28.8? All right, then if there are no others wishing to comment, I can call the question on the recommendation coming from the Budget Committee, in the letter coming from the Budget Committee, and I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. EX 28.11, the operating variance for the 9 months ended September 30th, 2021. We have no deputations. We do. I'm sorry, we do have one. I apologize. And it is Derek Moran. Is Derek Moran on the line?
To the chair, Derek Moran is on the line. One moment, please.
Thank you.
To Derek Moran, I'm now unmuting your phone line.
Okay, Derek Moran, welcome. You know the rules. You have 5 minutes, and there may be some questions. Please proceed.
Can you hear me, Mayor Tory?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm just going to start my timer here. I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied. In doing so, it's fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. So in this report, it says regarding the Toronto Police Service, there is a $0.1 million net unfavorable variance that is projected at year end. So Mayor Tory, you know, every once in a while I do an actual deputation at the police board, and that last month there was an item that dealt with the duty to inquire, and I read a case that explained the significance of being put on inquiry. So I have an actual deputation to make, because I can't help but feel this $100,000 unfavorable variance at the police board has something to do with what you know Chris Langenfeld has had to say recently at the board for 2 months in a row, that the Toronto Police Services Board has allegedly been making payments to law firms in secrecy, which resulted in both times Chair Jim Hart hanging up on Chris Langenfeld. So my deputation is, as he is the chair of Budget Committee, that I appoint Councillor Crawford to act as the trustee for me in this matter and put him on inquiry, that when Chair Hart, Tony, and Interim Chief Raymer go to the budget meetings next month to beg him for more money, that Councillor Crawford inquire of Chair Hart while he's there if it is true that the Toronto Police Services Board has been making payments to law firms in secrecy, and if so, how much exactly has the Toronto Police Services Board paid out to law firms in secrecy? So in this report, it also says The financial impacts of COVID-19 are difficult to accurately predict as this pandemic is without precedent and the length of the pandemic is unknown. First of all, what I would say to that is, what pandemic? As shown in the City of Toronto's own COVID cases link on their website, I provide my written presentation, there are currently 25 people in this city in hospital with COVID. I mean, I don't want anybody to be in the hospital with COVID, but that's 25 people in a city of 3 million people. And the restrictions that we have placed on us right now, 25 people in a city of 3 million people, are completely out of proportion. And I know CFO Heather Taylor probably doesn't know any better, but as she wrote this report, I would direct her to read, so she is aware of it in the future, the very bottom of the Reopening Ontario Act, where the province mentions, it is Section 17, termination of COVID-19 declared emergency. Unless it is being terminated before this section comes into force, the COVID-19 declared emergency is terminated, and Ontario Regulation 50/20, Declaration of Emergency, is revoked. Because I'm not quite sure how anyone at the City of Toronto can say that we're still in a pandemic when the province in this act, by their own admission, has terminated the declared emergency which the COVID pandemic was based upon, without it being disinformation that's being spread by the corporation of the City of Toronto operating as John Tory. So as for the financial impacts of COVID-19 are difficult to accurately predict as this pandemic is without precedent, as mentioned in this report, I would point out an article and tweet from the UK's Telegraph newspaper, which commented that the UK Deputy Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Jenny Harries, has recently said that COVID was possibly no more dangerous than the flu. I also point out a link to a question asked by MP Steve Baker in the UK Parliament on what the infection fatality rate for COVID is. He asked the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care what his department's most recent estimate is of the COVID-19 infection fatality rate. This is from Joe Churchill. As of 15th July, Public Health of England's modeling group estimated that overall infection mortality rate is approximately 0.096%. So that's a survival rate of over 99.9%, which is consistent with the Public Health of England, which has its own data showing that the case fatality rate of the Delta variant is 0.1%. Again, I put that in my written presentation, which conversely means it also has a survival rate of, again, 99.9%. And that's my time.
Thank you very much, Derek. Are there questions of the deputy? Okay, seeing none, I will thank you very much for your deputation. And we can then move to questions of staff on the operating variance report for the 9 months. Are there any questions of staff? Pardon me. Seeing none, we can move to speakers. Are there members of council wishing to speak, members of the committee, or members outside? I don't see any still with us, but if there's anybody that wants to speak. Okay, well, I had held the matter down, and I will just make a few remarks, and they're really consistent, if I might. I'll just do the clock here with what I said this morning to the media. The operating variance report, in some respects, tells some good news stories in the context of if you can look inside it and analyze underneath the top line the efficiencies and savings that have been achieved by city staff doing a lot of hard work, totaling more than $1 billion over the last 2 years. It has some heartening news in the context of some of our revenue sources, which have been buoyant, starting, of course, with land transfer tax revenues. But it also has in it some very cautionary, if you want to use that word, or there's probably stronger words that could be used, arresting items that need to be attended to, and I think we have successfully done that in the context of 2021. I speak, of course, of the shortfall in transit revenues and some of the increased expenditures that have arisen directly out of the pandemic. And the bad news is there have been those increased expenditures and there have been those dramatic revenue shortfalls. The good news is that thanks to the efforts the city has made, and thanks, frankly, to the cooperation and support, collaboration and partnership of the other two governments, and in particular of Prime Minister Trudeau, Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, Premier Ford, and Minister Bethlenfalvy, and Minister Clark, we have had the support that we need, as have other cities, by the way. It's not just been Toronto that have had this issue. It's all cities, that most of whom require a balanced budget, certainly all of them in Ontario, and most in the rest of the country. And so for 2021, there actually is very encouraging news with respect to how we have taken a problem that started very big about this time last year and have worked it down through a combination of savings and efficiencies and support from the other governments to something that is going to allow us to finish the year with a budget that does not have that, I'll call it that hole in it that it had before. The challenge that's in front of us, and the reason I wanted to speak at this meeting this morning, and the reason I spoke to the media about this earlier this morning, is that we need to have the same kind of support through 2022. The budget process as it's presently underway, and it's not, of course, complete as yet, but it shows every sign, just based on mathematics almost anyone could do, that with transit ridership, for example, having come back up into the range of 50%, but only 50%, the estimated shortfall for this year in that area will be in the high hundreds of millions of dollars for 2022. And again, to go back to the discussion and analysis we had at this time last year, we have no other way in which to make up that kind of revenue loss other than to either dramatically increase taxes, which I think would be wholly inappropriate at this point in time when people are just coming out of a very difficult period for themselves, and same with businesses. Secondly, would be for us to dramatically cut expenditures on frontline services, which I wouldn't to be part of that. I mean, others, I don't think the council would either, but I certainly wouldn't vote for that because I think it's the wrong time to be cutting back on frontline services. I'm not sure there ever is a time when you should be cutting back on them as opposed to trying to deliver them more efficiently. And then finally, the third and final thing we could do is to dramatically cut back on capital, which I think, again, would be unwise in the context of the various things we're trying to do to modernize the city, to make it more climate friendly, to do all the things we're doing to have a city that is livable and functional, and all the jobs that go with that capital investment. And so we're left, and last year the good fortune was that the other governments agreed with that none of those other options were the best way in which to deal with what is an emergency situation brought about by the pandemic. And so I am simply saying today, on December the 7th of 2021, we are at the stage now where that partnership that was so helpful and that came together so well last year about this time has to come together now. It is sooner rather than later because, of course, our budget preparation, as is the case for other cities across Ontario and across Canada, is at a reasonably advanced stage. And as we begin the discussions with Council and with the public, I think it is going to be important for us to have some indication, as we had last year. We didn't have a check in hand, but we had pretty strong indications that those governments were going to be our partners in dealing with these extraordinary circumstances. Pardon me, and almost as importantly, they had agreed with each other on how they were going to do that, and it was a matter of documenting that and getting it put to bed with all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. And so I want to, at one and the same time, thank the other governments for the support they have extended to the City of Toronto and, frankly, to cities across Canada, because I'm very much involved in the movement of the cities, big and smaller, to make sure they're treated in an equitable and fair manner during these difficult times and at all times. But in particular, as regards the City of Toronto, to say the time has come for us to move to the next stage of those discussions for 2022, with various indications having been given, including mentioned by the Finance Minister in his economic statement this fall, that they would be there to help municipalities, and including some indications given during the election by the party that won the election, the Liberal Party, that they would be there for cities as well. So I'm sure that help is going to be forthcoming. I think the time has come to get at that in earnest. I'm going to be applying myself completely to that, as I have in prior years, and I think we'll achieve success. But I think it's worthy of putting it on the record today that the time has come to get down to brass tacks on that and to make sure that we all know what's going to be done so that we can govern ourselves accordingly. And I want to just finish by saying thank you to the city staff for all the work they always do on all of the budgeting and variance monitoring and all of the financial management of the city, which has indeed been recognized by all three of our credit rating agencies who've called the city prudently managed and affirmed our credit rating during this very difficult year. Thank you. Any, pardon me, any other members of the committee wishing to speak? All right, then. This is accompanied by, I think we just received this. I don't have the recommendation. We just received this report. So I'll just call the question on the motion to receive this report, the operating variance report for the 9 months ended September 30th. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is 2814, which is the Ontario Line Downtown Stations Temporary Road Closures and Community Impacts report. It was suggested by a couple of councillors there'd be a short presentation on this because it is a monumental report in terms of its impact, but also in terms of the good news side of this, which is the transit it's going to build. So we would proceed then, if we may, with that presentation. And I would ask, I've seen the deck, and it could end up taking a much longer time, but if we could try and keep it to maybe 10 or 12 minutes, that would be terrific, and then we can go, and a lot of the other information can come out in questions to staff. So can we proceed with the presentation of the summary of the report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, everyone. Again, it's Barbara Gray from Transportation Services. I'm going to be taking us through the presentation, and I will try to keep it as tight as I can. I think we're on not on presentation mode, so maybe Aisha can take a look at that while I queue up the first slide. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is that this is actually the first report that's coming to council that's related to the actual construction of the Ontario Line project. We've had lots of discussion about Ontario Line and its importance, but I wanted to start out by just reminding people that when we talk about construction impacts, it's always important to remember the benefits that the Ontario Line will deliver: more access for people to jobs, more people within walking distance of higher order transit, removing cars from the network, and reducing fuel consumption, amongst others. When completed, the Ontario Line will be 15.6 kilometers, run from Exhibition Place to Science Park in about 30 minutes. There'll be 15 stations, and the line's going to cost about $10.9 billion to build. It also connects in with 2 existing subway lines, the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, the GO Rail network, and existing TTC surface routes. And it is going to increase overall transport network capacity significantly, as well as resiliency in the network, which is really critical and important. Next slide, please. The project is being built by Metrolinx through their delivery partner, Project Co. And the city's primary role is to permit and oversee construction so that anything built in our right-of-way is to our standards, that we can ensure access to the road network is maintained, and that work with Metrolinx to ensure that appropriate information and communications are happening with council and the community. This report seeks approval for temporary long-term lane road closures to construct 6 downtown stations: King Bathurst, Queen Spadina, Osgood, Queen Street, Moss Park, and Corktown, and attempts to minimize the construction impacts on the community and road users is significant. We've really worked very closely with Metrolinx and their proponent to pull together a package of road closures which are going to be the minimal necessary to get the job done. The road closures that are in this report, and I really want to emphasize this, they are the maximum permitted for the proponents of the RFP. And Metrolinx's procurement process really encourages innovation and incentivizes the proponents to reduce the number and duration of the road. There's some guiding principles that we put together in order to drive the development of this report and these closures. First is to minimize the extent and duration of the road closures. Secondly, to create a safe environment for pedestrians, cyclists, vehicles, and construction staff. Maintaining transit surface and its access. Maintaining access to businesses and residents. Effective communication so that we are communicating early and often with councillors, the community, and businesses, and that Metrolinx is also doing that, and that there are financial incentives that are built into this project to minimize the impact of the road closures during both the procurement phase and financial penalties when the road closures are exceeded. So the Metrolinx team, in collaboration with city staff have worked very hard to minimize the road closures so that 5 out of the 6 station impacts are on local roads only. And when building such a massive transit infrastructure program in a developed downtown, the lane closure requirements are typically much more significant. So I just wanted to let you know that we've really worked to try to minimize them as much as we can. And then I'm going to go through on the next few slides, station by station, just quickly, starting, next slide please, at the west end at King and Bathurst. This is all in the report, but just to really stream through it here, there will be curb lane closures on both King Street, which will be reduced to 1 lane in each direction for a very short stretch, about 40 to 45 meters, and on Bathurst, where there will be northbound curb lane closures. 2 lanes will remain northbound, and the southbound direction will not be affected. At Queen and Spadina Station, the northbound parking lane and sidewalk on Spadina will be closed between Queen and Bulwer with a replacement walkway provided in the parking lane, and 2 northbound traffic lanes will be retained and southbound traffic will be unaffected. The eastbound curb lane on Queen Street West will be closed for about 80 meters to put in a pedestrian walkway that will be provided there, and this will reduce Queen eastbound from 2 lanes to 1 lane for a short length. Westbound will be unaffected and retain 2 traffic lanes. Next slide, please. At Osgood Station, the northbound sidewalk, parking and curb lane, and bike lane on University will be closed for approximately 100 to 120 meters, and a replacement pedestrian walkway and bike lane will be provided. 2 northbound traffic lanes will remain along with a replacement bike lane. And on University southbound, a short length of closure will be required in the parking lane, along with a short length of closure in the median lane. Also impacted on Simcoe Street, the west side curb lane, which is one-way southbound, will be closed, leaving 1 southbound lane open to traffic along with the existing Contractile bike lane. And then I want to talk for a moment about the Queen Street closure, because I think this is the one that most people are primarily concerned about. The one closure, as I mentioned, 5 of the 6 stations have closures on the local roads, but the one closure that is required on Queen Street is for the Queen Street station between Bay and Victoria. So on the right hand of this slide, or the image that has the section, it shows the slice through Queen and Yonge intersection from the road surface down, and I think it helps to illustrate what a complex and large project this is. At the very bottom, you can see the Ontario Line track and station platform, and then far above it, just beneath the road surface, is Line 1 Queen Street subway station. So to get down to the new stations, there'll be elevators and multiple escalators. Just to put it in context or perspective, the excavation is 40 to 45 meters deep, which is approximately a 12-story building, or just less than the height of the Statue of Liberty. The station box is about 207 meters long, so about 7 streetcars. Or 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and the excavation, the soil that's going to be taken out, 70,000 cubic meters, enough to fill 28 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So it's a huge undertaking on Queen Street, and while we have tried our best to minimize the impact on the road network, we are going to have to do a lane closure on Queen Street. Next slide, please. And the resulting road closures that are needed from 2023 to 2027 to get this station built will be Queen Street will be closed from Bay to Yonge, and from Yonge to Victoria. North-south movement on Yonge Street will not be impacted. James Street, adjacent to the Eaton Center, will be closed for both laydown and staging, so that Albert Street will be converted to 2-way operations. So again, where there's closures, we're looking to the network to make modifications to help manage the impact. And then next slide, please. The final 2 downtown stations are Moss Park. For Moss Park, the curb lane will be closed adjacent to the park, with 1 lane westbound remaining open to traffic and eastbound lane open. And for Corktown Station, the eastbound curb lane on King Street East will be closed for a short length, reducing it to 1 travel lane eastbound, and the southbound curb lane closure on Parliament Street, leaving 1 lane open for southbound traffic. That's what I'm going to tell you about the lane closures. I just wanted to very quickly in the last few minutes go over, kind of summarize the mitigating impacts. So to the next slide, to mitigating impacts for pedestrians and cyclists. The project will be adding protected lit walkways in the curb lane where the sidewalks have to be closed. And if the walkway can't be provided, pedestrians will be safely detoured to the alternate sidewalk at the nearest signalized crossing. All bicycle lanes are maintained or protected, and Metrolinx will be installing a new southbound cycle track on York Street between Richmond and King West. Next slide, please. For the transit service, the TTC Line 1 service will not be impacted. The TTC surface streetcars 504 King, the 510 Spadina, and the 511 Bathurst will all be maintained. The TTC 501 Queen streetcar service will be impacted by the Queen Street full closure, and there will be a detour route that will be provided on York, Richmond, and Adelaide. Next slide. So in addition to those, we also, Metrolinx did some traffic modeling work to assess the impacts of the closures on traffic. 3 scenarios were compared: pre-pandemic traffic levels, using the city-led projects only and their impacts, and then the city-led projects with the Ontario line closures. And this modeling work helps to inform planning for alternate routes, detours, and tactics that can be used to support travel through the area during construction. So as you can see on these slides, the sort of high-level impact in the report, of course, goes into more detail. That for pre-pandemic traffic, with the satisfactory in the morning peak and getting congested in the afternoon peak. If you're just looking at the impacts of the city-led projects, the morning peak is still lighter, but some impacts starting to see 1 to 7 minutes of increase in travel time. And the afternoon peak period is the most congested and the one that we really need to pay the most attention to, with increases between 5 and 24 minutes. When you add in, next slide please, the Ontario line, you see about the same in the morning peak, but the afternoon peak period degrades a bit more from 5 to 29 minutes of congestion. And again, this is just one tool, but a very, very helpful one to help us plan for the period of construction and to manage the impacts. So going to the next slide, please. One of the things I just wanted to share with you is that there are built-in incentives for Metrolinx and their contractors to minimize the number and duration of lane closures during this process, and then to adhere to that plan during construction. So the proponent who's going to do the building will have to submit monthly lane closure analysis reports detailing the lane closures, the ones that happened in the previous month and the ones that were projected for the rest of the project. If they anticipate that those closures are going to exceed the time frames that they've planned, they have to submit a mitigation plan to the city to get that back on track. And if they don't meet those parameters, there are daily financial penalties. So what that means is two things, really. Lane closures are already minimized through this bid process, and that the proponent will have to stick to those or they will incur financial penalties. There's communication protocols set up in place so that we can manage that as the construction moves along, and that once the bid process is complete, there's little scope to make significant changes to those closures, but again, the impact is what we have to manage during the ongoing construction component of the program. And on to the next slide, please. I think it might be almost my last one. We are setting up a construction hub as part of this project that will provide a high-level oversight and coordination amongst the Metrolinx work, city-led projects, private development, and the utility projects. There will be a city hub coordinator, which will be an on-the-ground single point of contact for these activities, and they will look at advanced planning and coordination of deliveries, oversight and review of worksite conditions, and hold regular meetings with all the constructors working in the area to minimize the combined construction impacts and ensure communication with the local councillors, residents, and businesses is effective. And as part of managing this hub, planned construction on parallel routes will be kept to a minimum. Next slide, please. With regard to Vision Zero, there's also a Vision Zero lens that's been applied to these proposals. The truck haul routes will be developed ensuring Vision Zero principles. Safe and accessible pedestrian routes will be kept clean, and snow and ice will be removed. All bicycle lanes will be maintained and protected. There'll be, as I mentioned, a new cycle track on York Street. There will be traffic control personnel at work sites to avoid conflicts between construction vehicles and pedestrians. And we will oversee that the work zones are well lit and there are clear sight lines to ensure easy and visible access. Communication is also, next slide please, critical during this construction process. There will be information distributed through traditional and electronic media. The road closure information will be shared with both the web-based network service providers such as Google and Waze. Also, advanced advisory signage will be placed to communicate closures effectively and in advance of choice points where travelers need to make decisions about where to head. We will deploy traffic signal changes to maximize mobility for traffic and surface transit vehicles, and will conduct monthly construction liaison meetings, which will include councillors, businesses, and residents, as well as community outreach meetings and BIA meetings throughout. And then this for sure is my last slide. Next one, please. Helping businesses, certainly we're working very closely not only with Metrolinx and their proponent. They will develop and implement a business support plan to create partnerships with local BIAs. A city-based BIA liaison position funded by Metrolinx will serve as a single point of contact for businesses and residents on Ontario line-related matters. There will be marketing and advertising initiatives to promote shop local, wayfinding signage for businesses, and work zone cleaning and frequent window washing to help minimize dust and other debris. So with that, last slide is the future, we hope. And I just wanted to thank you for giving me the time to go over this. I know it's a very long and complicated report. There's a lot more detail in there, and we're happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms. Gray. I will then turn to questions of staff, and I'll start with members of the council who are visiting with us. I see Councillor, I'm sorry. You're quite right again, I'm sorry. Two deputants first. They are starting with Diana Belshaw, Gooder and Moritz Neighbourhood Association.
To the chair, that speaker is not present.
All right, we'll give another chance later on in case that person comes back. Andre Berman, Corktown Residents and Business Association President.
To the chair, that speaker is not present.
Okay, so neither of the speakers are present, the deputants, and so I will then move to questions of staff, and I will start with members not on the committee, and that would mean for the moment, Councillor Kristen Wong-Tam, so you can go ahead and ask your questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you to staff for the presentation. Recognizing that this is a very complicated and technical report, you said that this is the first report that's coming forward. What is the other reporting structure? When can we expect more information?
So perhaps through you, Mr. Mayor, this is Derek from Transit Expansion. Councillor, there's going to be a series of reports that will be occurring commencing in the first quarter of next year. So it'll be January, but then also throughout next year as the project advances, you'll be getting more. There'll be more reports back to council as we get more information.
Okay, thank you. But once this report is approved today, like literally, it's sort of out the gate for us that we're giving permissions to staff to give approvals to Metrolinx for a multi-year closure of significant downtown roads. Is that correct? That's what this report represents right now.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, you are correct. The one thing, however, councillor, that we can assure you is that this is not one and done. This is the first step in a series of information that needs to be provided by Metrolinx, further planning as we get more information from the successful proponent that's actually going to be delivering the project, that there will be more information provided at subsequent dates. And maybe I'll turn it over to my colleagues in Transportation Services if they have any other questions.
Thank you. Because I don't have a lot of time, maybe I can just go through a few more questions. But your answer was very satisfactory and easily understood, Derek. Thank you. So I just want to understand this other further point. Barbara Gray, you mentioned and stressed that this was going to be the maximum street closure, the maximum that the city council would permit. That's what staff has recommended. How do we ensure that Project Co, the winning project builder, is not going to simply build this into their structure as sort of business standard, so that therefore there is truly an incentive for them to do less, meaning less road closure, quicker construction? Because the experience I've had with developers is that if you say this is the maximum you can have, they're going to take the maximum time, maximum road closure. How do we ensure the reverse there?
Well, through the mayor, I'm happy to start with that. So you need two things, right? So saying that it's the maximum envelope is only part of it if you don't have the oversight of, and in this case, Metrolinx providing requiring their bidder to have incentives and to get the smallest footprint possible to deliver the work. So they are advocating, supporting, directing them to do that. And if they put in a bid that goes beyond what they said they were going to do, they're going to be financial penalties. So there has to be the oversight and management at that side as well, which I think is different than you see with individual development projects. Councillor Wong-Tam, I know it's a bit of a different scale and a different level of oversight and direction.
So are you confident that we will most likely see something that's not maximum road closure, maximum length of time? I heard yes from Derek.
So,
yes, and then perhaps.
Oh, sorry, Barbara. Maybe if I can add in. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, yes. The reason, and further to where Barbara was going, the incentive that's built into the actual bidding documents requires the contractor to actually bid. The more that they've created a savings that's practical off of that closure date, the more money, the better that their bid will be received. So they're going to be evaluated through points as well as cost to their NPV for a shorter time frame for these closures. So there is a significant investment, incentive for them to actually come in with a shorter practical time frame for these closures.
Okay, thank you. I have 30 seconds. I'm going to try to get 3 questions in, and maybe you can answer all 3 of them. So the first question I have is, half of Moss Park is being taken over for construction, and 3 acres of First Parliament lands are taken over for construction. Is it absolutely necessary for them to have additional road closures? So that's question number 1, and I'm going to get the next 2 out. There's going to be a requirement for more work zone coordinators, more noise bylaw officers, more traffic agents, as well as pay duty officers. Who's going to bear that cost? Is it Metrolinx? Do you get to ask for what you need in order to keep the roads moving? And then the final question is that businesses and special events and festivals will be impacted. Who will provide compensation to them? How do we keep them alive and surviving past the 7 years, 8 years of construction? Thank you.
So let me start off, and then Barbara, if you want to kind of jump in. Sorry, I mean, sounds like it's more directed to Metrolinx. So with regards to the need for the land and subsequent lane closures, the lane closures are required actually to allow for the vehicles that are going to be taking away the debris, I'm going to call it that, from the site, to actually be located and to actually safely bring away the materials that are going to be leaving the site. So there is a need for these closures to occur, especially in the areas that are not, for example, the Queen Street closure one is more contained, but the other sites will require these lane closures in order to allow them to bring away the debris. With regards to the requirement for Metrolinx to compensate the city for the services that it needs, Metrolinx has indicated that they will definitely work with the city to ensure that where the city needs the appropriate resources to support the development of the transit, that they will commit to funding this. Now, specifically as it relates to how many of these specific items, that's still something that we need to work out. But there is a commitment from Metrolinx that they will fund these additional resources that are required to make sure that the city is maintained in a safe and efficient manner. Did that answer all your questions, Councillor? Sorry, did I miss one?
Thank you, Derek. It answered 2 of them. The final question was with respect to impacts to businesses and festivals and special events. Who would provide support and compensation? We're talking about 7 years of impact here.
Yeah. So through you, through the mayor to you, Councillor. Same thing. Metrolinx realizes that there are going to be business impacts. They are. First of all, they are engaging with the local businesses primarily to understand kind of what the impacts will be. But there is, again, an understanding that there will need to be some form of compensation. I can't be specific exactly what it is right now, but they have indicated that they are interested in continuing these discussions with the city.
Thank you. That was the last question for Councillor Wong Tam. I would say certainly our experience with Eglinton would suggest that is something we need to work out for sure. I saw Councillor Pasternak's hand up at the very beginning, and so we'll move to him next, and then Councillor Ainsley, and that'll be the next 2. Councillor Pasternak and Councillor Ainsley. Go ahead, Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. I was involved in 2 requests from Metrolinx for full closures. One was Keel Finch for the Finch West LRT, and the other one was Bathurst and Eglinton for the Eglinton LRT. And in both situations, the request to full closures of those intersections was denied, and life went on. The construction continues to proceed. The projects will be done. The commerce continues to move. The traffic continues to move. How often, or in light of those experiences, how many of these requests can we really take a sort of a sober second look at and have them work out an alternative?
So through the Mayor, if I may answer here, can I just check that you can hear me? Apologies, Mr. Mayor and committee. I've been having internet problems this morning, so I'm not able to be on video. So apologies about that. So, Councillor, so we've been around the block multiple times with Metrolinx on each and every one of these requests that we're putting forward to committee today, and we'll be putting forward to council. So full constructability assessments have been done on each and every one of them. We really have reduced the amount of lane occupancy that is needed. 5 of the 6 stations, there are fairly minor lane occupations which are needed. For the most comprehensive one, the Queen station, just a closure, is the most practical way of constructing it. You saw from the cross-section the scale of the operation that is necessary to construct this new station directly underneath the Line 1 Young Line. Metrolinx, working with us, did look at whether a partial closure on Queen Street was possible, and there's some details of that outlined in the report. I mean, essentially, it would take 6 months longer to construct it, significantly longer, 12 months longer for Queen Street Station. It would lead to knock-on delays for the overall Ontario line of 6 months, additional costs of over $200 million. And I think more importantly, from our perspective, when we were looking at it from staff, was that actually it didn't make a great deal of difference in terms of traffic impacts. It didn't really help the traffic move much better at all, because essentially you're taking Queen Street down to what would effectively be one lane only. So the traffic diversions that we see under the full closure would still be occurring. So it really didn't make any sense for us as staff to come forward and recommend just a partial closure of Queen Street. So I think in summary, Councillor, please be assured that we've worked for many months with Metrolinx over this. We've been around the block multiple times to try and look at how we can squeeze the last metre of existing road to stay open.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it at that. Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Next I had, no, I've forgotten, I didn't write it down, but it's Councillor Ainsley.
Ainsley.
Yes, it is, yes. Councillor Ainsley, you're next. Go ahead.
From Eastern Scarborough.
I remember your name and where you're from. I just didn't remember who had put their hand up, but it was you, so please go ahead.
Not a problem. Thank you, Mayor Tory. I think this first one's to Barbara Gray, and I want to thank her for the presentation. I wanted to ask specifically around sidewalk widths for my first question. I was walking around downtown a lot. I plan to do it more, but there's a couple of references around sidewalk widths. One of them in one area, 1.8 meters, which is well below the city's minimum of 2.1. And another stretch along Queen and King, which are fairly busy sidewalks, and it says the city's going to meet the minimum width, which is, to me, seems kind of dangerous. Barbara?
Thanks, Councillor, through the Mayor, to you. So 2.1 is our preferred affected clearway. It's our city standard. 1.8 is the absolute minimum that we believe meets the AODA, and that we try to get 2.1 wherever we can. When we have the ability to do that, we certainly do. In some cases, and Ashley can jump in here if there are other pieces that are important to underscore. In some cases, we could only get the 1.8 in order to create the walkway. We will do other things, including lighting and making sure that there's cane detectability and all of those pieces on the accessibility side. And I'm not going to disagree with you, Councillor. I think it will be tight through the construction zone. We want to make sure it's well marked, well lit, and I don't know if there's any other items that Ashley wants to add.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. And just really to reiterate, I mean, much the same way we approach the lane closures, we take sidewalk closures very seriously as well. Metrolinx have effectively accommodated replacement sidewalks for all of the sites. In some locations, it just wasn't quite possible to squeeze the 2.1, but we'll still be examining that when we're actually physically out on site. And if there is scope to squeeze an extra, 0.1 of a meter or so, then we'll be doing all we can to make sure that those walkway widths are maximised.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And my next question is around Vision Zero. When I was reading through the report, specifically in your slide deck, Barbara, you kind of outlined a couple of different areas where we're looking at Vision Zero. But in the report, it only really specifically mentions Vision Zero in one paragraph, and it says it a couple of times. I'm just wondering, in future reports, could we have something more specific, as like a dedicated section to Vision Zero and what's being done under Vision Zero, so it stands out more?
Through the Mayor, sure, we're happy to do that, Councillor. I mean, we apply the Vision Zero lens because we want to make sure that the work sites are not only set up safely, but they're overseen and managed safely. But we're happy to put more details into subsequent reports. I think that's a good idea.
Okay, thank you. And then I wanted to ask the TTC about public transit and the streetcars. We currently have the dedicated King streetcar. I'm just wondering, what we're doing in terms of keeping the streetcars moving, and maybe are there options for more dedicated streetcar lines on Dundas and King while all this is going on?
Scott Haskell here, TTC through the chair. We'll be working closely with city staff on that sort of thing. We fully expect that the present transit priority arrangements on King Street would remain. We are also looking at what sort of transit signal priority would be possible for the Queen streetcar diversions. The key thing here is that we intend to divert the Queen streetcar as close to Queen Street as possible, which will reduce the effect on 15,000 a day customers who ride through the area.
Okay. And I asked that, Scott, just because in one part of the report where it talked about the average car speed, somewhere, where was it, my notes, 3.9 kilometers, and, I walk pretty fast. People have told me I walk 5 kilometers or faster. So I'm thinking if I'm walking faster than I'm driving, if it's a long walk, I'm going to jump on a streetcar. So I think it's important to have the transit lined up. And then my last question, I wanted to ask about Metrolinx and what they're doing to compensate businesses in the areas we're coming out of COVID. Are they looking at a proactive compensation model? I know that festivals were mentioned, but I think we've seen around construction projects throughout the city that businesses always seem to be hard hit as customers will go somewhere else if they're faced with a lot of road traffic or pedestrian traffic. I'm just wondering if Metrolinx has said anything about tax breaks or other financial assistance for businesses.
So through the mayor to Councillor, again, just to reemphasize, Metrolinx has indicated that they will be have commenced talking with businesses, and they will continue to talk with businesses about the impacts that will be had on them. Specifically, there has been no mention of tax breaks that they've mentioned, but they have indicated that they are obviously looking to engage with businesses to help understand kind of what the impacts will be, and then to work with the city to kind of determine what forms of mitigation that can be offered.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Tory. Those are my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Ainsley. Other members of the committee, I see Deputy Mayor Thompson. Can I just take a bit of a check before we turn to you, Deputy Mayor? It's 12:17, and we have obviously to complete this item, which will involve some speakers and some more questions. And then we have the licensing and restaurant issue, and there's a couple of deputants on that, and then the item of new business. Would members prefer that we keep going and see, work through the 12:30 period, or that we do take our normal lunch break? I know people make meetings on days like today, so I just want to be considerate. A thumbs up is for keeping going. Can I see other thumbs or not? Thumbs down, thumbs up, 1, 2, 3. Thumbs down for Councillor Crawford. Councillor Pasternak? We don't, he's on the phone.
He's on the phone.
Well, Councillor Crawford, is that a grave problem for you?
Yeah, I just have 2 meetings that I can't get out of, Mr. Mayor. I may be able to sneak out I can do about 15, 20 minutes, but that would be about it.
So, but if we adjourn for lunch for the normal hour, then you would be able to be back after lunch, or were you not coming back in any event?
I'll be back. I had lunch meetings, but if it's the will of the committee, I'm fine.
Okay, because it does seem to be the will of the majority that we should continue, and so can I have a motion that we would extend then beyond 12:30 to finish the agenda? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
So moved by Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you. Okay, please go ahead then, Deputy Mayor Thompson, with your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. Thank you for the report, and I've read the report, but can you explain to me, beyond simply the closure and so on, what's the nature of the work that's going to be done? I mean, the Ontario line is primarily underground, but help me to understand how this is impacted by the above ground request and the desire to close down the streets and sidewalks for obviously the considerable period of time that's in the report.
So maybe I'll start off through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor. So Deputy Mayor, as the image was shown by Barbara in her presentation, the actual Ontario Line station is about 45 meters below grade. It is the whole Ontario Line is going through a very narrow right of way. Like, there isn't a lot of room on either side because of the built environment. So the only way for this closure to work effectively is for them to what they call dig out, cut and cover type of construction, which is effectively they're going to peel back layer by layer until they reach the level of the subway tunnel. And what they do to avoid collapsing the buildings on the side is to put in shoring to prevent that from occurring. So that's the reason why it's taking especially at Yonge and Queen, it requires that level of excavation to occur. It can't be done any other way other than to dig out a big hole down to the level of track level and then tunnel underneath the subway and come up on the other side on Victoria. So if there was different ways that they would have done it, that was one of the things that we've been pushing on Metrolinx to come back to us with, and they said no, it's just simply because of the geometry that exists right now in that area.
Got you. Thank you very much for that explanation. So similar to what we saw on Shepherd in North York when that line was being put in place, right? The cut and cover?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Then can you help me to understand then, obviously, the work that's actually being done, the potential impact in terms of buildings in the area, because you talk about the proximity and so on to the very narrow area that the work is being done in. How do we ensure that the drilling and other work that's going to be done there, how do we ensure that there is not a real negative impact to the buildings that are actually in place? What kind of engineering work is being done, studies to ensure the overall safety of these buildings? I mean, is there a potential possibility that they could be perhaps collapse or any type of issues regarding the foundation of some of these buildings? Have we done all that work?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor, that's a good question. As is the case in any deep excavation that occurs, what you are going to see happening along the corridor is that there will be sensors placed on at various locations. These sensors are going to be very sensitive to any sort of movement and will halt work if there is the potential for any sort of movement. We don't like the movement itself will create a problem. We're not even going to get to the point where it reaches a point where it's going to potentially collapse. Like, this is about being proactive. But perhaps maybe if Transportation Services has a comment on this, maybe I'll leave it for them to answer if they've got anything further.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and to the Deputy Mayor, yeah, I would just reiterate what Derek said. It's exactly the same as on Eglinton. There's hundreds and hundreds of monitoring wells, they're called, are installed in the roadway and in the surrounding ground surfaces. So they monitor the ground conditions and then detect any minute movement. So that if there is any minute movement detected, then work would be stopped and they would investigate that before they even continued.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And my final question is, I know that my colleagues have asked questions around business and compensation and so on. But my question is, what role is our economic development department playing with respect to facilitation and conversation and planning and preparation with Metrolinx? Is it Metrolinx is just simply coming in and telling us how they'll be working with business, or is there a collaborative approach in terms of cooperation between economic development? We saw on Eglinton in my area with respect to the crosstown, that was a much afterthought. I'm just wondering if there's forethought to the collaboration and coordination in order to involve our economic development department.
Through the speaker, Deputy Mayor Thompson, thank you for your question. Certainly, we are working with the team in transportation services and with Metrolinx through Derek Toigo's office. We do intend to take the learnings from the Eglinton experience and apply those as we advance this work. So you will see a deep engagement by our BIA team and our colleagues in the BIA to make sure that we are building plans that respond to the needs of businesses and in fact support them as they are rebuilding and recovering.
Super. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Just get the screen back up here. Other members of the committee wishing to ask questions of staff? If not, then I just have a couple that have to do with, there's been a lot of good questions asked, and I do have a motion that I'll present when I speak that tries to cover a number of things, and we've had some good input there as well, because I'm moving some things on behalf of Councillor Wong Tam. Unusual as that may seem, but I'm delighted to do so. Can I just ask, I don't know who could answer this question, but in the detailed appendices, and it was written about in the newspaper this morning, and I was looking at it again, and I'm looking at page 66 of 71 in the report, and I wanted to make sure I was reading this correctly in terms of the impact on a street like Richmond Street, because I just think part of what there's all this further analysis that comes out of this motion that will come in a minute, I think of necessity we have to sort of find ways other than what the facts here would seem to indicate. And I know these are like modeling studies on what the impact will be on traffic, and the example that was cited in the paper this morning was Richmond Street. And if I read that, do I read across cumulatively? So the current base case east-west corridor travel time is 22 minutes, and then you add both 24 minutes for city construction and 29 minutes for the Ontario line, so you end up with a total of what, 53 plus 22, or is it 22 plus one of the other two? Can somebody answer that question in terms of minutes?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So it's the 22 plus one of the other two.
Okay, so if you sort of assume that total, let's pick that Richmond Street again, 22 for the base case, and then add the 29 for the city works plus the Ontario line works as a total of 51 minutes. That, to have people taking 51 minutes to go across the city on one of those one-way streets, even at afternoon peak time, is quite excessive, to say the least. Are we, when you look at the whole report, of course, there's problems on Queens. When I say problems, there are construction works on King Street. There's the King Street streetcar line there, which I, of course, strongly support and wouldn't ever propose to alter it. There's work on Queen Street. There's work on Richmond Street. Is there any practical way in which we are going to avoid a 51-minute venture across the city? Have people looked creatively at whether you can do other things with other streets, make other changes so as to, and it isn't just about car traffic, it's about trucks that are delivering things. That has an impact on business. It's about transit vehicles, which don't use Richmond Street that much, but might well end up using Richmond Street because of the closure of the other streets. Is there a way in which you're going to be able to put a plan together to say to people, if you do this, if you go here? I mean, sure, we can say leave your car at home, and I hope more people will over time for a variety of reasons, including our climate change discussions. But is there an ability you have to sort of work around some of that to stop a 51-minute, what I would call gridlock situation from arising?
Yes, so through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there absolutely is. Just to be clear as well, the numbers which we included in the report were conservative numbers. So the city works, for example, that you see listed there. So some of those are sewer works, which we'll be doing through no-dig technology, but the modelling work has assumed that we would have to open the roadway up. So there would be some impact on traffic. There are some other works which we're looking at whether we can retime those slightly. Some of those water main works, although those water mains which we've identified for replacement are 100 to 150 years old, so there's always the risk of a break, so we're very cognizant of that. But we're certainly working very hard to make sure that our program is coordinated but also minimised to recognise the overall impact on the network. But I think Barbara talked a little earlier about the construction hubs. So we'll be taking a holistic approach to managing traffic in the downtown. We'll be using all the tools at our disposal, so that will be changes to traffic signals, that will be transit signal priority for transit vehicles as well. We've got cameras up in the downtown. We'll be implementing no-fly zones. So there's a whole myriad of things that we can do. There's more work that we need to do, working jointly with Metrolinx and ProjeCo. When ProjeCo are on board, it's important that we work in partnership with them. So there's only a certain amount of the work that we can do at this stage working with Metrolinx. We need ProjeCo who are going to be doing the works on board as well. So we'll be doing that work actively over the next year before these closures start to really kick in. But yes, absolutely, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ashley. I have one other entirely different question. I don't know if we have somebody from the city solicitor's office on or somebody else who can answer this because of their knowledge of the legislation, but I think in the report early on it talks about the different legislative pieces that the province put in place to give itself, through Metrolinx or otherwise, the power to do these things. And I just wanted to clarify that if it was to be the case that we said, well, no, we're just not having this happen in our city and so forth and so on, am I correct in assuming that this Getting Transit Built Act, or whatever it's called that's referred to in the report, would give them the power just to basically move forward and override what the city said about these things, as much as that may seem like an unfair or inappropriate thing to do?
I think it's correct that they put in place a provincial framework that facilitates this if they can't reach agreement with it.
Okay. Sorry, it's just a little hard for me to hear. And you said that they put in place a framework that is meant to facilitate an agreement with them. Is that what you said?
It would facilitate them proceeding with the work if they can't reach agreement with
us. They can't. Yes, of course. Okay, so the answer is yes, they could override. If we just said we're not agreeing with you on this, they could override that and just proceed ahead to close these streets and do things that ordinarily they wouldn't really be able to do without our concurrence. Yes.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Okay, are there any other questions of staff on this matter? All right, seeing none, then we could move to, sorry, Catherine, did you? Okay, seeing none, we could move then to speakers, and we would start with our visiting council members, and Councillor Wong Tam would be first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to you in advance for moving what I believe is hopefully a series of motions that can probably mitigate some of the impact that we are going to experience in the downtown core, from construction to the breach of road safety to the impact on local businesses, and the list just goes on. We have been, and myself and my staff have been struggling with, how do we try to make the very best out of a situation that, of course, is going to have disruption, but also ultimately going to bring us the transit that we want. And I think that, there's no one in the core of the city, and no one in the city that's going to say that transit is not good. But certainly we want to be able to do everything we can to mitigate the impact, both road, noise, traffic, as well as business disruption. And I just want to point, Mr. Mayor, you have been fantastic to always be advocating for businesses and the supports that businesses need to survive. And under your leadership, you've worked really hard, along with the members of the executive committee, to make sure that businesses have opportunities to be successful, especially during the COVID pandemic. My big concern, and the concern that I believe is shared by many of those residents and businesses in the downtown core, is that COVID has hit us exceptionally hard. I've talked at great lengths about the need for a downtown economic recovery. And our runway to recover has to be very short. We can't take 10 years to launch an economic recovery plan. It's got to be up and running now because my businesses can't hold on. So this particular project, civic infrastructure, very important project, is coming at probably a very difficult time for us. Because we've seen the decimation of the downtown with respect to visitor traffic, to the employment clusters being closed down, to the office towers being practically sitting at 15% occupancy, sometimes 20, and we don't know if we're heading into another lockdown. Who knows? So although there weren't necessarily a large number of deputants today, I can tell you that when the road closures take place, it is going to be extremely jarring. People will come to realize that we're essentially closing down the downtown for the next 7 to 8 years. And that's significant impact any which way you cut it. There are questions, and I think that some of those questions staff did try to answer, and I take their answers at face value. But those questions are still going to exist in the community. In my section of the Toronto central portion of the downtown, those questions will include, why does Metrolinx need to take half of Moss Park and still take the sidewalk and still take the roadway? Why do they need to take the entire First Parliament site, which is almost 3 acres large, and still ask for Parliament and still ask for Front Street for the next 7 to 8 years? And I don't think that we're going to have really great answers for the community. We're not going to be able to message our way out of this with the visitors who are going to be disrupted, and as well as civic life downtown, without being able to make sure that we are able to bring the process of approval back to City Council and back to the Executive Committee and back really into the hands of the community in an ongoing and consistent way. So that means that we have to have clear communication in advance, and we need to have it frequently. We're also going to need to build in financial supports for the businesses, which I know are going to be impacted because they're already struggling and trying to stay afloat. And it can't be a request of Metrolinx that one day they might entertain. It has to be prescribed and built into the program and to the project whole bid. It also means that we have to ensure that, when it comes to pedestrian cycling safety, road safety criteria and objectives that we want to strive to achieve in the city, we've got to build that out now. And I do understand that the Building Faster, Transit Faster Act allows the province to override literally anything that we were asking for. But our success, the downtown success, is entirely tied to Toronto's success. If we don't recover in the downtown, Toronto is not going to recover from COVID. The Ontario line is not going to be much use to us if we don't get this right. So, and I know that if Toronto's success is impacted, then Ontario, Southern Ontario, and Ontario's success is going to be impacted. So I thank you, Mayor, for moving these motions, and I thank you for the opportunity today. Hopefully we will continue to bring Metrolinx to the table to get this right. And hopefully we can alleviate some of the concerns and fears of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wong-Tam. Are there any other, I'm just looking to see, I don't see any other members visiting with us, so we can then move to members of the committee. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just making sure. Okay, so that would bring up next then Councillor Ainsley, followed by Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. I do have a motion that I am going to move. That City Council requests the Toronto Transit Commission to include in future reports information on what is being done to maintain and advance time availability of its surface fleet in the construction area, in particular streetcars. So I'd ask the members of the committee to support that motion. Reading through this report, I want to thank for all the staff that they've done to date. It's a very comprehensive report. I raised some of the concerns that I have around sidewalk width and making sure that we're very clear on what the city is doing in terms of Vision Zero. And this is a Metrolinx project. My experience that I've had before with Metrolinx, around the Scarborough subway expansion, work that they've done on the Lakeshore East GO train line. They're not always the most opening and receptive to suggestions and advice. I hope that they will be more receptive to what's been said today and the motions that have been moved and that are going to be moved by Mayor Tory. I think everybody here agrees that we need to keep people moving on public transit. We've advocated for a downtown relief line for a long time to take the pressure off the Bloor-Danforth line. My ward is in the southeast corner of Scarborough, and I often hear from people about how difficult it can be and how overcrowded the TTC is as they try to get into the downtown core. And I hear that as well from friends of mine that live in Western Toronto, in North York. So it's not an isolated thing to Scarborough. At the same time, though, as you look at the timelines around this report and the impact that it's going to have on Toronto, it's not going to be without its pain. I think everybody appreciates you can't have better public transit these days without some kind of pain. But I think what we have to do as a city is, to the utmost of our ability, to mitigate that pain, including making the suggestions we are making today to Metrolinx. I think we're the ones with our boots on the ground. We're in contact on an everyday basis with residents in the city, much more, I think, than those people that work at Metrolinx. So I certainly hope they will take our suggestions and, in some areas, criticism to heart, and will implement what we're asking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ainsley. Next, we had Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just very briefly, I think it's important to reemphasize some of the content that I asked in the questions. To remind staff, I was involved in the Keele-Finch request for full closure, and of course got involved in the Bathurst-Eglinton request for full closure, both for Metrolinx, both for major high-level transit projects. Both were declined. And in doing so, life went on. The construction continued. The closures didn't go into effect, and the projects were able to proceed. Now it's probably true there was a longer construction time and a more expensive construction cost. So there is a price to pay. So the only reason I mention this again is that when it comes right down to the decision of handing over the closure permit and the permissions, it is important to take one sober second look at these requests and see whether it's absolutely necessary to grant them. Because I've seen in two key situations where we said no, and life went on. So I'll leave that with you. The other final point is, and it's been touched on, that when you start building infrastructure like this, 30 years after it was supposed to build, you're building in very narrow, congested, density-high areas, and it's going to create a lot of traffic and pedestrian chaos. But these projects we've been asking for decades, and they're being built. They're going to be transformational when they're finally completed, but there will be a very messy process in getting them done. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Others wishing to speak on this report? Okay, well, if there aren't others, I will speak. Let me just reset the clock here. So, first of all, I want to say thank you to the staff. I mean, there's been obviously a huge amount of work done. I know some of it's been done by Metrolinx because it's their own project that they're proceeding with here, but I know our own staff have done a job to try and help us with the analysis. And indeed, I do have a motion to move here that is meant to take it the next step, I guess, which is to say, well, okay, we have the basics in terms of what has to be closed and kind of why. And I think it's a good report in that it talks about impacts on trucks and impacts on pedestrians and impacts on cyclists and so on. But I don't think it goes that next mile that I guess I should say kilometer, that Councillor Pasternak was talking about, which is to say, well, look, we've been here before. Where we've been told something had to happen for a long period of time and it had to be very widespread in its application and so on. And we pushed back a bit. We were ingenious. We looked at different things we could do and found a better answer. The construction got done and the world didn't come to an end, but we were better off because we took the extra look. And this motion is really meant to direct itself to, when you boil it all down, looking at a lot of the practical implications of all this and seeing if there are better ways in which we could do things, and having our own staff report back to us, knowing that that's why I asked the question about the province holding a lot of the cards here. But, I think it will be, I think their spirit of partnership on trying to get this transit built is such that they would not want to sort of steamroller over reasonable suggestions we would make that would facilitate the construction, but at the same time make it easier for pedestrians, cyclists, business people, transit vehicles, cars, and so on. And so there's a lot of work to be done here, and I say that in a sympathetic tone because a lot of our staff and additional people we're going to have to hire. And by the way, somebody asked the question earlier on as to who would pay for this, and certainly it was included in the motion here that we make a request of Metrolinx that they should pay. And I'm very much of the view, and I've said this based on the Eglinton experience, that it should be routine that the proponent of these projects, which in this case is Metrolinx, should include in their budget a degree of addressing these kinds of practical problems of people getting around, but also some sort of allowance for businesses that are going to be adversely affected. We know from Eglinton that that is the case. This is a bit different in that it's not a long stretch of continuous construction, but we certainly know that is the case. Bottom line here, we need the transit. And, while people can be critical of where things are going or how they're going or above ground or below ground or any of that kind of thing, we are in the fortunate position, I think, with some arguments about how it's being done, that we're going to get $30 billion worth of transit that we needed probably a decade ago, let alone a decade from now. And the second thing I think we can be grateful for is the fact that Metrolinx shows, I'm sure at the behest of their own shareholder, that they're getting on with it. It is not something that's going to be under construction in 5 years from now. For good or for bad, these kinds of closures and disruptions start next year, but it means we're getting on with it. It means they're going to start moving utilities and doing things that have to be done to build underground in that fashion. We need the transit because, frankly, it's the only way in which we're going to get people to leave their cars at home. Ultimately, congestion is going to be relieved not because we tell people to leave their cars at home, that helps, or suggest it. It is going to be because they have a better option or as good an option as driving around. But we have to do better while we build. And the we in this case is not just the city, but it's Metrolinx as well. We have to coordinate, we have to enforce, we have to use technology, we have to use common sense. And the common sense part, I've been frankly disappointed at the fact that I think we've let down our guard a bit with the utilities, and they're the ones, somebody made reference earlier on, that are just going around and on a one-off basis just digging up streets because they think they're entitled to do so. And they just leave a sort of one hole where they're fixing one thing that maybe has to do with somebody's cable or internet hookup or some other such thing, and it causes massive disruption, which is bad for the economy, bad for the environment, bad for families, bad for everything. And it is done in some cases because people figure they just operate unto themselves and they can do whatever they want. So one of the reasons I indicated this morning to the media that I will be bringing forward, separate and apart from this, some measures in the winter to renew our efforts to deal with congestion more effectively, which I will do. One of those things that I will be doing at the same time is calling in the heads of the utilities and saying that it isn't business as usual. It isn't just a state anymore where we can afford to have people digging up streets, especially when we have a bunch of closures caused by transit construction, other crucial city projects going on. There has to be a degree of cooperation and coordination with those utilities so they're not just digging up streets whenever they feel like it. I believe that I'm concerned about a street like Richmond Street. I asked the question I did because it isn't just about some pro-car thing. It is about the fact that with no alternatives, people will drive, and it isn't just people driving to and from work. It is deliveries in trucks, and that's a cost to business, and it's a bad for a business downtown. They can't get their supplies. It's about the environment. In fact, if people are sitting 51 minutes instead of 22, there's a lot more emissions going into the air. It's about transit vehicles because they sit in those traffic jams too. So I just think all of this that's encompassed by these motions, and I thank Councillor Wong-Tam for her input into this because it's significant, as well as some of the stuff that I came up with in working with some councillors and others who are concerned with this. I commend this to you to support so that we can get this work done. I apologize in advance to the staff for all the work that it entails, but I think it's very worthwhile in order to do kind of what Councillor Pasternak talked about, which is to make the best of a situation that we have to endure to get the transit built, which is something that I'm proud we're doing. and I'm proud we're doing it with the province, and I hope they'll be good partners in achieving some of these objectives. Thank you. So, any other speakers on this? If not, then we have two motions in front of us, one from Councillor Pasternak, and I'll have that put up and call the question on that first. I'm sorry, Councillor Ainsley, did I say Councillor Pasternak? Councillor Ainsley. There it is. And it's some request of being made of the TTC, assuming Council approves this. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And then the motion that I moved, and it has a wide variety of things in it to do with very practical considerations and things we have to pay attention to in making the best of a difficult situation. And I will call the question on that if we're ready. And I will ask for all those in favor. Opposed? Carried. And the item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. We have two left. We can dispose actually very quickly, unless, does anybody have anything to say or ask about, I think it's very straightforward and it's a technical matter, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, just the item of new business. And it was brought on to protect, I guess, councillors against a potential problem they'd have in 2022, given the unusual chronology of the 2 years of many events being cancelled, followed by an election year, which was caught by the technical part of this policy. If there were really no questions of staff about it or no speakers, I would just call the question on the recommendation contained in the not the Ombudsman, the Integrity Commissioner's report. Are there any questions or comments to be made? All right, then I can move to the question on the recommendation. I'll move the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation and call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, then back to our what will be then our final item, 28.15. And 28.15 does have, let me just find it here, a couple of speakers, deputants, and so we'll see first if Sean Bowring or Bowering is here.
To the chair, that speaker is not present.
He's not present, okay. And Vas Kranis, I know was here early on this morning. Is Vas Kranis present? Okay.
To the chair, that speaker is present and their phone line is unmuted.
Okay, Vas Kranis, welcome. Thank you for your patience. I think you know how it operates here, and it is 5 minutes for your formal comments, and then there may be some questions for you. Please go ahead. Hello, Vas Kranis?
Hello now.
There we go. Hi, did you hear, I welcomed you, and I indicated that you have 5 minutes for your formal remarks, and that we then may have some questions, so please go ahead, and thank you for your patience.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I'll just start with a very quick background on myself. After acting as floor manager and then general manager of Lula Lounge for 13 plus years, I opened a small basement venue that received its liquor license just 2.5 months before the pandemic hit. My liquor license came with a capacity limit granted by the fire department using calculations for a seated restaurant. I'll give you all the benefit of the doubt that you've been to live music concerts in the city before, and so I won't waste your time explaining that not all concerts are seated with table service. I also assume that you realize the amount of space taken up by a person seated at a table is greater than the space taken up by somebody standing in front of a stage. As such, I am now in the midst of trying to increase that capacity to a number befitting the business I operate, a process that has stretched my bank account and sanity to its limits, and it is still far from complete. I'd be more than happy to outline that process to anybody interested some other time, ideally over a stiff drink. But for the moment, for the few remaining minutes that I have, I'd like to speak with you. I wish to express that while this review of the current licensing and zoning standards forced on our industry by the City of Toronto is much needed, it has caused a great deal of concern across our industry, to the point where many of my fellow venue owners would prefer things just to remain as is, despite all the glaring and obvious flaws, out of fear of stifling overregulation enforced by punitive governmental bodies with little understanding of the realities of our industry and how it is evolving. With that said, I personally have more faith in the motives of this review. I believe Mayor Tory when he says he wants Toronto to be known as a music city, and the fact that stakeholders such as myself, with my tiny basement venue, are being consulted in this process is testament to that. My central request to this committee in attempting to modernize the zoning and licensing standards of the live music presentation industry is to make sure you have a modern understanding of what live music is and what those who patronize these presentation venues are looking for. To exemplify this, I'll give you a quick snapshot of two of the events that I presented at my venue this past week. On Thursday, we had the second installment of a monthly Indigenous music series. The series is curated by a young local folk musician named Asanabi. He opened the show with a riveting acoustic set. Just him and his guitar. He was followed by an acoustic folk duo. And they were followed by a young DJ who immediately dove into a set of electronic dance music. Now, I would never think to program a show like this on my own. I'd never put a dance DJ following a folk act. My 40-year-old sensibility assumes that the crowd that's into a sit-down folk show has no interest in electronic dance music. But boy, was I wrong. Then on Saturday night, we hosted an up-and-coming incubator LGBTQ plus DJ event, giving a stage to young DJs who have never performed in front of a crowd before. This event was patronized by a much younger crowd than we typically host, young adults in the 19 to 22-year-old range. What shocked me, aside from how polite and well-mannered this crowd was the sheer diversity of music. DJs would play everything from rock to salsa to techno over a short 20-minute set. As a DJ, I would never curate such a set. It totally goes against my sensibilities. But the fact of the matter is the kids loved it. They didn't miss a beat. The reason I mention these events is to exemplify that the tastes of our customers are changing. Their tastes are broad and diverse. As a for-profit business, we must adapt to these trends. The current rules and regulations governing our industry hamstring us. We cannot adapt to these trends, stay profitable, and be in compliance with archaic regulations that dictate things like what percentage of my dance floor or of my floor can be used for dancing or what my menu must include. If you do not pay heed to these realities when you're reimagining the rules that govern our industry, you will find that all this effort to bring the city's bylaws into the 21st century will be out of date before the ink dries on them. Please, 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 do not create rules where they're not needed. Allow us the flexibility to provide malleable spaces that encourage creativity, diversity for our local artists, while allowing us to earn a living. This is absolutely essential to the cultural and economic growth of our city. I will close by saying that I'm always happy to field questions on this topic and to provide further insight into the smaller business models that are trending in the city's current music scene. Thank you all for your attention and your consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Granis. Are there questions of the deputy? Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the trouble and having the patience to stick with us and make your deputation. It was very helpful. Just to have one more try, is Sean Bowring has not come back or never come on since?
That's correct, Chair. They are still not present.
Okay. Are there questions of staff on this matter, starting with Councillor Pasternak?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. On page 12 of the report, it looks like there are some results of some surveys from restaurant owners or entertainment facilities. And the themes seem to be the vast majority want a reduction of regulatory burdens and increased flexibility in running their companies. Yet the tone of the report is that you're going to a hyper-regulatory framework. If the whole idea is to get approvals to consult on this package, and restaurant and entertainment facility owners are saying less regulation and increased flexibility, why are we then not listening and we're going out to bring in hyper regulation of an industry that's already vulnerable?
So thank you for the question. It's Carlton here. We are not hyper-regulating. We are not prejudging. We are in full agreement with the previous speaker and what he said. We are understanding that our rules as they currently exist are archaic. They don't align with zoning, and they don't allow for businesses to modernize, to adapt, and to change, as the previous speaker just spoke to. We are looking to introduce flexibility. We are looking to introduce regulations that make sense. Right now, they do not. By no means will we hyper-regulate. We will introduce rules and regulations that are appropriate for the type of establishment.
Thank you for that. We just went through the zoning conformity issue, and one of the big impacts was banquet halls sitting in employment areas. Yet I see this seems to be going down the same road, where we're looking once again at the locations of entertainment facilities, including banquet halls, I assume. And I'm not an expert, but it's my understanding when the report intimates that they may separate restaurants, create distances between restaurants and live performances, that takes away from restaurant clusters that are needed in the industry to operate effectively, and the ability to create entertainment districts. Is the plan to really look at those separation of various outlets and bring in, maybe a backdoor zoning conformity rule?
In terms of zoning, and Councillor, I'll first start by addressing banquet halls, which are generally defined in the zoning bylaw as a place of assembly. And with respect to separation distances, I would say that the purpose of looking at separation distances would be to see if there's a more effective way of regulating eating establishments that provide entertainment than the rules that we currently have, which set a restriction of on the amount of interior floor area that can be dedicated to entertainment within a restaurant. So that's a very awkward zoning rule. It's one that MLS officers have a very challenging time enforcing. And it's a rule that restaurants, which also offer entertainment, sometimes have a very difficult time of complying with. And so the question would be, can we accommodate the ability of a restaurant to offer live entertainment and also manage any impacts around nuisance or noise in a way that's more workable, more flexible, and more effective than this unusual 6% limit on floor area? Separation distances could be one approach to doing that. We may also look at it more closely and see that little or no regulation in this regard is actually necessary in our current economy, in our contemporary city.
It would seem to me that the separation you want is from late night or all night music venues from residential. Is that also on the table here?
Yes, it is, and I think that's an important observation. And our zoning right now doesn't really distinguish between those two things.
Okay, but we would grandfather those existing facilities.
Existing venues would continue to be permitted as legal non-conforming uses. I should also emphasize that in contrast to the zoning conformity that you cited, which was really looking at where different kinds of economic uses can be permitted, this review is looking at the standards that will apply to different uses, and less so at the geographic areas where they're going to be allowed. So one exception would be around nightclubs or establishments that are focused around dancing. Those are limited. Those are very limited in terms of where they're permitted right now in the city. And we may look at expanding the areas where that type of use is permitted to other parts of the city outside of downtown.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Questions of staff, Councillor Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Grant. Just wondering, the report, I think page 16 of the report, if my memory serves me, we talk a little bit about, I guess from 15 to 16, talk about the work that was being done. And I know in 2019 we were talking about issues relating to problem facilities and enforcement and collaboration with the alcohol and gaming and so on. I'm just wondering, at this point, have you developed a system in terms of dealing with the problem facilities that, albeit few in the city? I'm just wondering, what's the mechanism that's being used to address the problem facilities in the city?
So thank you for the question, Deputy Mayor. Absolutely. When we have multiple complaints about establishments, it's important that we respond and respond accordingly. We have developed very strong partnerships with the AGCO, with Public Health, and the Toronto Police Service. And the four of us often go out, and we have been actually, coincidentally, the past few weekends to these problem properties and identifying issues and working with those businesses to bring them into compliance. So we don't, we respond to problematic properties. We don't wait to be told, and we work with our partners.
Thank you for that. And you and your team have helped me in a number of locations in my ward. One of the aspects, though, that I found rather problematic is the situation with the Alcohol and Gaming Commission, in that whether or not a license is transfer and or a whole process in terms of a community consultation and a review of the license, in that we don't have much to do or say about that. It's exclusively in the domain of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission. Is this something that your report that you're looking at would want to address? Is it something that you feel, in as much as you just explained to us about the collaboration between the four parties and so on, I still find that there are some deficiencies. I'm just wondering, with the expectation of your report, will I see any changes that will come forward which will speak to that as an opportunity for councillors to be much more involved in terms of representing the interests of the community that they represent?
So I think that's a great point. You're correct that the EGCO has control over the transfers, and there's limited ability for the community, and the community can respond potentially if they post notice. But you raise a very good point. What I spoke about earlier was enforcement, and so we have a good relationship there. And we need to improve upon the relationship upon transfers and sharing data where we have problematic properties, and ensuring that we are advising each other of where there are problems. We had started this work, it got paused during COVID, and we will be restarting that partnership on this side of it.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. I'm just wondering, as you know, we have the Night Economy team and the working group, both an internal and external. I happen to be the Night ambassador, but obviously because of COVID, we have been limited with respect to what we could do. Just wondering, in terms of input into your report, how have our team been able to affect and or guide you in terms of the need? Because we need to do things differently going forward, and that's part of what your report is obviously hoping to examine, to broaden things and make things easier as opposed to make it more restrictive. Wondering the input that you've received from our group, how is that being received as part of the work to be done going forward?
So it's very important feedback. We are a member of that group as well. I'm doing a lot of work with the nighttime economy over the past 5 years. We are committed to it. It's important that we receive their feedback, and that gets embedded into our decision making, into our policy making, into our implementation. They are a key component, just like the music industry representative that spoke. It's important that we hear from them, that we understand the nighttime economy is different than it may have been 20, 30 years ago, and we need to develop policy that's based on how it's being used and ensure that it is flexible and adaptable so that business models can continue to improve. These industries have been hit extremely hard, and we want to work with them. We are not here to overregulate.
All right, thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Other questions of staff? Okay. Hearing none, I'll thank everybody on the staff for their answers and thank the members for their questions and see who would like to speak to this matter. Going once. Councillor Pasternak.
Very briefly as we wind up the meeting, but I just wanted to emphasize some of the points that I'm concerned about. And I remember when I spoke to the mayor yesterday, when I saw the title of this report, alarm bells started going off. If there was one industry that suffered acutely during the pandemic, it was the restaurant industry. And the last thing we want to do is cause them any harm. And I'm sure city staff know that as well. So we want to create a regulatory framework, and maybe I'm stating the obvious, that has the restaurant and entertainment, entertainment industry flourish, and not create, a binder full of regulations that kind of ties their hands behind their back. I mean, we must understand that entertainment districts are crucial, that restaurant clusters are key to the restaurant industry performing well. And of course, as we just got through the zoning conformity issue, and it's deferred back to staff, it's important to remember that banquet halls, they may consider that different than this, but I've been in many banquet halls, and much of what's in this report also occurs at banquet halls, that we must also protect the operation of banquet halls. And working in employment areas is actually preferable, where there's shipping, receiving, lots of parking, it's away from residential, and of course they can operate effectively. Little concerned that the initial surveys restaurant owners and entertainment facility owners want to reduce the regulatory burden and increase flexibility. Yet I'm concerned that when this comes back, it's going to be more rules and more regulation. We want everything to be safe. We want safety for local communities. We want safety for people who enter these facilities, whether it be in the food and beverage or the seating. We want everyone to have a good time, to be safe, but at the same time, we don't want to hurt the industry any further. And of course, when it comes to live performances and noise, it's proximity to residential that usually produces the most complaints. So with that, we're going to be watching this very closely, as we did with the zoning conformity, and we look forward to the report coming back. But I'm confident that the restaurant industry will speak up, and that staff will listen and learn, and we'll come back with a plan that keeps everybody safe, but allows the restaurant and entertainment industry to flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Any other comments? Councillor Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank the staff for this report. There are over 7,200 facilities, nightclub, cafe, bars, and pubs, and other eating establishment in the city, as well as we know also there's an underground component as well that we often have complaints about from the broader community. This is an opportunity, I think, to respond to the industry and I guess the concerns that operators have, as well as concerns that members of the community have as well. I've often said that this is not a city of no, it's a city of yes, in terms of working through and collaborating with one another and examining what the challenges and the opportunities are. I mean, this is an opportunity as part of this report, which is to review and looking at modernizing and creating licensing and categories that work and would reflect the better opportunities for businesses to operate. When we hear about things like, a facility can only have 6% of its floor space available for dancing, and we know that people want to move, want to dance. There's a tremendous amount of restrictions that is actually in place now. And part of this report is seeking to modernize, and of course, that modernization will only come with respect to the input from operators, a community at large, and others. And particularly, we have a lot of visitors who come to our city to experience and the flavor, the taste, the sound, and just all the things that make this a great city. This report, in my view, is not intending to make things more problematic or more difficult. Quite frankly, we know that's not the direction that we need to be going in. We need to be simplifying our rules. We need to be listening to the sectors. We need to respond to, to the needs and to operate in a fashion that really helps them to be more efficient, to be more profitable, and that things can actually work. But of course, recognizing the need for public safety, recognizing the challenges and the impact that tends to come as a result of the crowds and alcohol consumption and so on. I think that we're moving in the right direction with this report. I do look forward to when the information comes back, and of course the input that will actually form obviously the body of this report, and the recommendations that come from it will be consistent with respect to the desire of the industry and the public at large. So I'm looking forward to the work that we have to do as well for the night economy. But our staff is actually working. We have been waiting now to have an opportunity to really expand on some of the things that we are working on as part of that area, in terms of how we can amplify areas, barren and sort of orphan space, things that we can do with it, how we immerse more cultural elements into the opportunity and so on. So I'm looking forward to this, and again, just thank staff for this report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Others wishing to speak on this item? Okay. Pardon me, in which case I'm ready to receive a motion to move the staff recommendation in this report from Deputy Mayor Thompson, and I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. I believe, just make a brief glance over to the clerk. That concludes our business for today. Is there any other business any members wish to raise at this time? Otherwise, I will thank you very much, including thanking Councillor Crawford for coming back, and sorry to mess around with your schedule, but I think it was good to get this business all done in one tranche, and I appreciate that very much on everybody's part, and we'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.